between the mist and the steel. By the Holy Christ, what has possessed you? Coinneach roared, furious, fixing his gaze on the circle of men. You look like a nest of quarreling women. Since we set foot on this Sassenach land, everything has gone wrong, Thomas replied in a grave voice. First Echan, and now this. It's that woman's fault, spat Tormod, casting a threatening look at Nòraidh. Coinneach shook his head, arms firmly akimbo. No. The shadows began before. Have you forgotten? We didn't come to this land for loot or women, but because someone dared to steal my son. His voice thundered like steel striking stone. Does that ring a bell? His gaze shifted briefly to Nòraidh, then returned to the hardened faces of his men. Some remained attentive, others killed time in idle chatter. You can go against me if you want, but I don't think she had anything to do with Echan's death. MacAilpein pursed his lips, thoughtful. And you don't think it could have been her father? No, Coinneach cut in with sharp certainty. At first I suspected him, but no one has followed us. Whoever Echan's killer is, it wasn't Nòraidh's father, nor her. Remember this well, the arrow pierced his heart. The girl hasn't had access to a bow, nor the chance to use one. Besides, I was watching her myself. No. His voice darkened. It was someone else. Thomas and Beithan nodded silently. Then who? Asked Angus. If it wasn't the father. Maybe bandits, Caoilín ventured. Or one of us. Beithan said with distaste, as if the words burned his tongue. His gaze swept the group defiantly, perhaps daring someone to point at him. Coinneach lowered his head, serious. He's right. It could have been one of ours. His gaze traveled from face to face, men he'd known since childhood. Some had been punished by their mothers, and they had witnessed his father's lashings. They were clan brothers, sons of the MacCoinnich, heirs to the blood of MacAilpein's sons. The thought that one of them could be a traitor tore his soul apart. And yet it was so. It was Beithan. Tormod suddenly roared, turning and shoving the giant with all his might. Beithan barely moved, and the unintended comedy almost made Coinneach laugh despite the grim situation. Scoundrel, son of a Sassenach whore, spat Tormod, burning with rage. Beithan's eyes burned like embers, but the giant held back his fury. He didn't answer the insult, only furrowed his brow like stone. His rivalry with Tormod ran deep, and this moment made it dangerous. Enough, Tormod. Coinneach thundered, his voice brooking no argument. His authority must not be mistaken for weakness. Tearing each other apart will get us nowhere. Tormod, red with anger and shame for failing to move the Titan, lowered his head and muttered under his breath. Coinneach scanned them all with narrowed eyes like blades. My order is this: watch your backs and each other's. And you too, he pointed at Tormod and Beithan, bury your grudge. There's no room for disputes now. Silence fell, heavy as lead. There is a traitor among us, he said finally in a somber voice. The truth struck like a drumbeat in everyone's heart. No one denied it. And to that bastard I have a message, Coinneach continued, raising his voice. I will find you, and when I do, son of hell, I will rip your heart from your chest with my bare hands and watch your life fade like a soulless dog's. The men shifted, shaking their heads, denying any involvement. It wasn't me, protested Tormod. Nor me, murmured another. Nor me, the others echoed in chorus. Coinneach looked at them with bitterness. I expected nothing else. Thomas raised his voice, brave as thunder. Whoever it is, I don't believe their goal was to bring down Echan. I agree, Coinneach nodded grimly. He wasn't supposed to tumble dead down the hill. Maybe the arrow was meant for her. He inclined his head toward Nòraidh. Or for my son. His fists clenched like traps, fury tightening his jaw. Whoever it is, may God have mercy on their frozen heart, because I intend to rip it out and offer it to the wolves. Make sure the traitor knows. With those words, Coinneach turned sharply, carrying on his shoulders the bitter certainty that the enemy was no longer outside, but among them. Chapter 30. The same name. MacCoinnich was in a dark mood. Nòraidh needed no warnings to know that the wisest course was to keep her distance. She had already learned that lesson in her father's house. She didn't know the exact cause of his anger, but she sensed it had to do with the harsh argument he'd had with his men hours before. She had noticed it in the tension of his bearing, in the abrupt way he stepped away from the group, and in the fierceness of his gaze, so deep it made her shiver on the stone where she waited. Without a word, Coinneach saddled his horse himself. In a dry voice, he ordered Nòraidh to travel with Arhane, then without adding any comment, rode alongside the group, approaching his men only occasionally to issue sharp commands. Only Arhane seemed immune to his father's bad temper, and Nòraidh began to suspect this was not simple childish innocence but something more revealing. Coinneach had never raised his voice at the boy. Far from feeling jealous, she felt glad for him. Arhane was a bright boy, with a clear smile and a light spirit, wit almost as quick as his father's. And no child, Nòraidh thought, deserved to be treated harshly, especially not by the one who should protect him. So the two spent hours talking about everything and nothing. Arhane told her about his home, Creag Duv, where the stones of the tower had been set long before the first MacCoinnich set foot on those lands. He shared secrets about his father that she sensed Coinneach would not have wanted shared. He spoke of nightmares that tormented him, in which he whispered a wounded name. Issy Bale. The same name Nòraidh had clumsily used as a disguise, cruelly chosen by fate. She still remembered the heavy silence that fell over Coinneach when he heard it. There was no doubt he still loved his lost wife. That love, so obvious, unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She didn't know why, but she would have preferred that man had been capable of a terrible crime, rather than imagine him dreaming night after night of another. It was a maze of absurd emotions she herself despised, but could not escape. One thing she was sure of, her father would not come back for her. She could stop looking back, stop tearing scraps of cloth like breadcrumbs in the forest. It was time to accept. May God have mercy on her soul, for she would never forgive the man who had abandoned her so easily. The last shred of filial affection had burned away in the fire of that betrayal. Loving him had never been easy, she knew now. She had done it only out of duty, because he was the only living relative. That chain was broken. Whether she liked it or not, the MacCoinnich men were now her people. Sitting on the stone, she felt exiled from her former world. But then Arhane approached, his clear voice and face reflecting his father's, green eyes, golden hair, bright smile. And the weight in her chest lifted a little. Yes, she thought. This was now her people. She hadn't chosen them, nor had they chosen her, but fate had intertwined their paths, and she would decide to be grateful, even if her heart still burned with anger and mourning. The journey north continued in silence, broken only by bursts of joy from Arhane. When the wind picked up, the boy hid his face against Nòraigh's chest, and she sheltered him as best she could, cradling him with a song. She never would have believed such a small body could endure such fierce cold. She herself was chilled to the bone, perhaps because her inner emptiness made her more vulnerable to ice than steel. The weather worsened each day. A freezing mist wrapped around them at dawn. Nòraidh shivered while the Scots seemed like stone against the harsh elements. The sun shone high, yet the frost robbed their flesh of feeling. They rode farther than she thought possible, until the rain gave way to snow. Disbelieving, she held out her hand and watched tiny flakes melt instantly on her burning skin. Then she understood the MacCoinnich lineage, men who rode barefoot, barely covered by their plaids, standing proud and untamed. She could not. She curled against Arhane, seeking warmth, her bare feet numb with cold, until Coinneach, without even looking at her, took off his plaid and draped it over her shoulders. She would have liked to refuse, but the gesture was impossible to deny. Beithan also approached, offering his. Emotion blurred her vision. "It's for the little one," he murmured with a slight nod. Nòraidh swallowed her pride and accepted. Beithan stayed beside her for a while, entertaining her with stories about his dog Florade. She tried not to think about the parasites infesting the animal, though her skin burned with disgust at the thought. Still, she endured the discomfort. She didn't want to hurt the giant's kindness. The warrior would have kept her company longer, but then Coinneach rode back beside her. A single look from the laird was enough for Beithan to step away. And again silence fell between them. He didn't speak a word to her. He didn't even spare her a glance. She was still angry with him. She couldn't hold it in, even though deep down she knew it was absurd. By hiding the truth, Coinneach had only tried to protect her, to shield her from the weight of something that could break her spirit. For that she should be grateful, yet she couldn't find the strength. She hated him for denying her the truth, because silence was lying, wasn't it? She wished she could tear out his tongue for that silence, slap him for having the audacity to kiss her, to make her believe for a moment that she was loved, when every feeling was a risk, an open wound. God Almighty! More than anything else, she wanted to throw herself into his arms and cry until she was empty. She longed for him to hold her, to kiss her, to claim her as his own. She wanted to lose herself in him, in that world of flesh and fire where the heart didn't matter and only physical surrender ruled, a world she would have stayed in forever, never looking back. She wanted to force him to recognize her, to look at her as before with that burning passion that consumed her, not with that pity that hurt more than a dagger, awakening in her the temptation to gouge out his eyes so she wouldn't have to endure that gaze any longer. But as always, she was asking too much. Coinneach MacCoinnich rode beside her in a stony silence, barely casting a shadowed glance her way now and then, as if words had died inside him. He was wasting time. It wouldn't be long before Coinneach unraveled the hidden thread of events. And then what would become of him? He would once again own nothing, and he wouldn't allow that. Angus knew he had to speed up his plans, take advantage of any opening, every shadow. That damned foreigner had managed to shame them all without raising her voice. It was enough for her to say a few words for the men to fight over the dishonor of carrying the foul-smelling corpse of Echan. He had kept himself from offering, and now he wondered if Coinneach had noticed. He glanced sideways at the laird, who continued riding with a dark brow and the look of one burdened by ancient ghosts. Since Echan's fall he hadn't spoken a word to anyone, not even to his Sassenach, though Angus had seen, again and again, how he watched her in secret, like a man consumed by gazing at something he could never possess. As for the woman, she rode with a face too easy to read, a whirlwind of desire, anger and contained pain. Well, thought Angus, he himself would soon put an end to those sorrows. And just the thought of it curved his lips into an eager, almost feverish smile, anticipating sweet victory. Chapter 31. A watchful eye over the land. Perched atop a hill with gentle slopes, Creag Duv looked like a place born from dreams. Not even Artair's proud tales had prepared Nòraidh for the sight unfolding before her eyes. The fortress stood like an enchanted stone sentinel, guardian of an ancient realm. Her breath caught in her chest. The air was cold at that height, yet the blooming heather burst into a blazing purple over a mantle of emerald green. Among the fertile meadows, menhirs weathered by centuries stood like proud guards, watching over the colossal tower that dominated the summit. Some thatched huts clung to the hillside, humble at the feet of the giant. The mastio, slender and circular, was unlike anything Nòraidh had ever seen, a grey needle reaching toward the twilight sky, carving a silhouette of power and grace against the dying light. As they climbed the path, Nòraidh barely breathed. Her eyes, bright with wonder, devoured that unreal vision. It was a castle of legend, so different from Baal and Aquila, her father's fortress, that harsh, brutal mass built only to intimidate and mar the softness of the English countryside with dark stone. Here everything spoke of nobility and harmony, the hill wrapped in a purple cloak, the tower rising like a king among men, with a high window that seemed like a watchful eye over the land it ruled. Under Nòraidh's astonished gaze, men and carts emerged from the cabins, crowding along the dirt road. They leaned forward, murmured with anticipation, waiting for the clan's arrival. Then Artair's warm voice, followed by Coinneach's clear laughter, pulled Nòraidh from her daydream. Father and son rode beside her, and the laird's stern expression had softened. His face shone with uncontrollable joy. In that moment, sorrow vanished from his features, leaving only shared happiness. And though in their bliss they seemed to forget Nòraidh's presence, she didn't mind. The light of their joy was contagious, like the sun breaking through clouds after a storm. Coinneach knew what his people longed to see. Without warning, he lifted his son onto his shoulders. Arhane, waving his arms like a living banner, let out a jubilant cry in Gaelic, a fiery greeting that burst into laughter and cheers. Nòraid couldn't help but smile at that overflowing happiness. Caught in the father and son's joy, she blinked hard, trying to dispel the tears threatening her eyes. Coinneach's genuine laughter, sparked by the child's delight, clenched her chest with a sweet ache. What must it feel like to be loved that way, and to return that love fully? Suddenly, the pressure in her chest became unbearable. Seen in profile, Coinneach's face was that of a magnanimous warrior, but when he turned to her and winked with a mischievous boldness, Nòraid thought her heart might leap from her chest. "And well, girl?" Coinneach asked, a spark in his voice. She swallowed and shook her head softly, unable to speak, choked by emotion. "Ah, girl," he murmured, bringing his horse close to hers. Holding firmly onto little Artair's legs, he leaned toward Nòraid as much as the restless boy would allow. "Don't look so grim," he added, with a smile that flashed like sunlight on polished steel. "They don't bite, Mocree." Nòraid raised an eyebrow, incredulous. Coinneach chuckled softly and, turning to Thomas, commanded, "Stay with her, old fox." A heavy silence passed between the two men, a shared glance that Nòraid found indecipherable, as if something crucial slipped past her. Thomas nodded without a word, while Coinneach spurred his mount and took the lead of the company. Nòraid caught Thomas watching the laird's upright back, with an expression shifting between pride and mockery. "My heart, eh?" the old man muttered with a crooked smile, shaking his head before giving Nòraid a meaningful look. She was confused and barely managed to wonder if that heart referred to some secret ailment. But the spark that lit Thomas's joy soon drew a smile from her as well. The clan's infectious energy, the fervor with which they greeted the laird, moved her deeply. The scene was so different from what she had experienced at her father's court. There the men followed Lord MacAilpein like servile shadows, careful that his cloak never touched the dust, yet behind his back they cursed him without shame. Nòraid never blamed them. Their thoughts were the very ones she had never dared to speak aloud. "And you haven't even seen her yet?" Beithan said, appearing beside her with his deep voice. "Who?" Nòraid asked, with a hint of bitterness, as her eyes clung to the figure of Coinneach riding with Arhane on his shoulders. An inexplicable longing swept through her, to be there, so close to him, to feel that smile meant only for her, to return to the arms that had held her once before. "Florade," Beithan answered simply. Nòraid blinked, not understanding. "She's my dog," he added, pride shining in his gaze. The young woman stifled a laugh with a false cough. Thomas, who had heard, disguised a mischievous smile beneath his moustache. And he was right. Beithan could have talked for hours about his animal, and Nòraid, if she didn't begin to feel some sympathy for him, might have wished to cover his mouth. Suddenly, the big man squinted and pointed into the crowd. "There she is. Look." Nòraid followed his gesture, a black and white spotted dog, being petted on the back by a child. Beithan whistled, and the animal came running. "Look," Beithan repeated, eager for her not to miss anything. But Florade, faster than expected, jumped just as Beithan turned his head. The impact was brutal. A sharp crack announced the breaking of his nose, and the young man fell to the ground with the dog on top of him. Nòraid jolted, pulling the reins, while Thomas's laughter thundered like a storm. She dismounted and ran toward them. Florade, frightened, backed away with her tail between her legs, while Beithan, red and bleeding, lay dazed on the ground. Compassionate, Nòraid knelt beside him. She tore a strip from her worn skirt, and pressed firmly on the bridge of his nose. Around them a crowd began to gather, some laughing heartily, others looking at her with brazen curiosity, as if the scene had taken unexpected turns. "For all the devils," someone shouted. "Beithan's got himself a woman." "A woman for Beithan." Another laugh. The crowd roared with jokes and exclamations until a mocking voice boomed. "No wonder Florade broke your face, scoundrel. No one blames the dog, she's a beauty." The dog, as if understanding, darted back among the crowd's legs, and launched herself at her owner's face with a fervor that brought fresh laughter. "Looks like Beithan will be sharing his bed with two bitches tonight." The laughter exploded like a gale. A flush rose to Nòraid's cheeks. Then the crowd suddenly parted. Coinneach MacCoinnich appeared among them, his brow furrowed like an impending storm. Without a word he bent down, lifted her by the waist, and tossed her over his shoulder like a conquered prize. "For all the saints," he thundered with icy fury. "But with Beithan she won't share a bed." And with long determined strides he forced his way through the crowd, carrying Nòraidh, who barely managed to hold onto his back. Chapter 32. To hell with the rules. A heavy silence fell over the crowd, as though the very breath of the clan had been held. Dozens of stunned eyes followed the sight of Coinneach, walking away with Nòraidh slung over his shoulder. The blush set her cheeks even more aflame. "I thank you for rescuing me from my predicament," she said in a tight voice, punctuating each word with a small fist against the man's back, "but you might have acted with a bit more decorum." Yes, Coinneach thought. Perhaps I could have. But reason had abandoned him the instant he saw her bent over Beithan. It was not the care she showed him that drove him mad, or perhaps it was, but the voices of the men hinting at what he was not willing to tolerate. The mere image of Nòraidh sharing a bed with his warrior turned his stomach. And before he was fully aware of it, he had left Arhane in the safe arms of Blanid, and forced his way toward them both. No. He would not allow it. She was his. He could not say at what precise moment he had decided it. Perhaps in the fevered ardor that had followed their union. Or perhaps when he saw her riding beside Beithan that afternoon, leaning toward him, laughing as if they shared secrets. Never in his life had he felt such savage jealousy. Like a man possessed, he had had to restrain himself from stepping between them and sending the good-natured giant to hell. And yet the impossible had happened. In only a few days, Nòraidh had won over not only Beithan but many of his men. He saw it in their gestures, in the way they watched her with a kind of reverence. Even Beithan's unusual loyalty to her was a dagger that took him by surprise. Perhaps it was the moment he watched her gently brush the hair from Artair's brow, listening to his babbling as a mother would to her beloved child, that his heart roared in his chest like a war drum. Then he understood that he wanted to tear her away from everything and everyone, to possess her and love her to the point of madness. He did not know the reason for the tide that swept him along. He only knew that he wanted her. And he wanted her now, beyond decency, beyond the eyes of the clan. To hell with the rules. To hell with the world. Artair was at home. Blanid would watch over him as if he were a grandson born of her own blood. That bond deserved time. Coinneach, by contrast, burned with a different hunger, one that only Nòraidh could satisfy. Ignoring protests and threats alike, he carried her over his shoulder to his own dwelling, climbing the stairs that led to his chamber. "Put me down," she demanded angrily. "I am more than capable of walking on my own, by all the saints." "Of that I have no doubt, lass." But he did not release her. Nòraidh let out a cry of indignation. "I said put me down. Everyone is watching us." "Are they really?" he replied with feigned indifference. The young woman let out a growl of pure frustration, so fierce that Coinneach barely managed to contain a deep laugh. "Release me at once. I order you to. You are a beast." "I find it hard to disagree with you, Mocree," he answered, a glint in his voice. And paying no heed to her furious words, he carried her into the room. He kicked the door shut, and only then set her down on the floor, leaving her free. No sooner had her feet touched the wooden floor than Nòraidh rushed across the room, so affronted that she scarcely cared if she stumbled in the gloom. She stopped only when her courage began to falter, then she spun around, hands on her hips, and hurled a blazing look at the MacCoinnich. The shadow of his body, cut out against the single door, was imposing, almost a living wall barring her way. "Heavens above," she exclaimed, realizing she could scarcely make him out at all. "Don't you have a damned candle?" She had never felt so humiliated, except perhaps when she discovered her father's betrayal. And yet Coinneach MacCoinnich's roughness brushed against that same pain. "There are no servants here to anticipate our whims," he replied with serene calm, almost disdainful. "We fend for ourselves. Forgive me if this chamber seems cold and dark to you." Nòraidh pressed her lips together. as if she had grown up surrounded by luxury. Her father had never even deigned to give her a proper name, much less a comfortable home. She had worked her hands until they became rough and hardened. Remembering it all, her anger returned like an ancient fire. "No servants?" she retorted with irony. "What a tragedy." "Bah, I shall feel just as much at home." "I will take care of it," he murmured, barely a whisper. A taut silence followed those words. Then Coinneach stepped away from the door and walked through the shadows. Nòraid followed him with her gaze until a candle flame suddenly caught, and the light revealed the room. It was spacious, yes, but stripped of all ornament. The enormous bed covered in furs dominated the center, solitary, while the rest lay bare, warmed only by an unlit brazier. The naked stone walls seemed to ooze cold, and the single window was secured with ill-fitted planks through which only thin strands of light crept in. The austerity was almost monastic. But it was his face, suddenly lit by the wavering glow, that captured Nòraid. The light drew golden flashes from his eyes, fierce and melancholic. "What is this place?" she asked in a whisper that failed to hide her unease. "My chamber." "You sleep here," she blurted out, incredulous. She had expected tapestries, weapons, some sign of pride. Nothing. "Yes." She raised her brows and scanned the room again. "It is desolate." "It serves its purpose," he replied with plain conviction. "Why surround myself with riches my eyes will not see while I sleep?" Silence fell between them once more. Nòraid felt it on her skin, as dense as a cloak. And when she lifted her gaze, she found him watching her. He always watched her, as if waiting for something. That scrutiny tore at her. He was the only one who had ever made her feel loved, and at the same time he forced her to look at herself without masks. And that was unbearable, except when she fell into the abyss of his eyes. "Tell me," she burst out to break the tension, "did your mother not teach you that one does not carry a lady about against her will?" Coinneach's brows knit, his jaw hardened, and he looked away. Nòraid felt a spark of triumph, but instantly regretted it. She had hurt him. And the dark cast on his face made her catch her breath. "Ah, lass," he said gravely, his voice low as distant thunder. "My mother bears no blame for my poor manners." The light in his eyes dimmed for a moment, replaced by a deeper shadow. "I never knew her." "Oh," Nòraid murmured, her fury turning to compassion. "She died giving me life," he added, without averting his gaze. The revelation struck her hard. An invisible, profound bond joined them in that instant. The urge to embrace him, to soothe that silent pain, was almost irresistible. "I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. He held her gaze, and in those burning eyes there was vulnerability and fire at once. "Do not blame yourself. You could not have known." Coinneach leaned in slightly, and his finger brushed her lips to still her. "Shush, I am not a weak child. It is all right." But his eyes were no longer on hers. They had drifted downward. First to her lips. Then lower. And Nòraid's heart shuddered as she realized the direction of that gaze. Her own body, treacherous, betrayed her. A burning blush engulfed her entirely. "Am I not?" she whispered, barely breathing, unable to meet his eyes. And with a sudden flare of dignity, "No. Of course I am not." He smiled faintly, a fierce glint on his lips. And when he raised his eyes again, what Nòraid saw was pure, untamed desire. She knew it without doubt, he wanted her still, with the force of a wildfire. And that certainty sent a thrill of joy through her. Heat flared in her belly. Her voice trembled, but rose like an unavoidable confession. "Neither am I." Coinneach took a step forward, the candle trembling in his hand. Nòraid felt her legs weaken, the air burn in her lungs. When he set the candle on the brazier, the flame remained trapped in the half-light between them. His voice reached her, grave and deep like a dark prayer. "Neither what?" "Neither am I, what?" Nòraid stammered, as if waking from a dream. Coinneach turned toward her, arching a brow with that dangerous calm so natural to him. His gaze forced her back to awareness. "Ah yes," she exclaimed in an almost clumsy impulse. "My mother. I did not know her either." I know, lass, he replied with serene gravity. Nòraid frowned, suspicious. How can you know that? The MacCoinnich clenched his jaw and closed his eyes for a moment, drawing a deep breath like a warrior holding back his fury before battle. Because, he said at last, his voice like tempered steel, no mother, none worthy of the name, would have allowed her daughter to reach womanhood without even giving her a name. The sentence cut through her like a blade. She felt tears burn in her eyes but refused to look away. She would not be ashamed of what was not her fault. Instead, she clung to the same outrage she saw mirrored in his golden eyes. It is true, she whispered, broken. And for the first time she admitted the unconfessable. No mother would ever have done that. She clenched her fist, relaxed it, and closed it again with contained fury. Nor a father. No, Coinneach confirmed, erasing the distance between them with resolute steps. He raised a hand and brushed her chin with a single finger, a touch so light and so searing that it prickled her skin. Nor a father. Nòraid began to tremble, though she knew it was not fear coursing through her veins. The warmth of that touch, so simple and so intimate, undid her. No, she whispered, her voice a mere thread heavy with feeling. A shiver ran through her body. I have lived blaming myself, she confessed, broken by memory. I believed it was I who made her flee, my mother. Coinneach frowned, a flash of disbelief crossing his face. How could you think such a thing? You were barely a child. No creature can be the cause of such abandonment. She lowered her head, as though shame still pursued her. I dreamed of her face when I was little, she murmured. He gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. I too carried guilt that was not mine, he said in a deep voice. But no man, no woman can bear the weight of the world upon their shoulders. My father, on the other hand, blamed me without end, Nòraid added bitterly. A single look from him was enough to make me feel guilty for his disdain. You deserved better, he murmured, so softly it was almost a prayer. Tell me what you desire, and if it lies within my power I will give it to you. I will do for you what others denied you. A faint moan slipped from her throat, closer to a sob than to desire. Anything, he insisted. Ask. She lifted her hand timidly, and rested it on his arm. The contact unleashed a shiver in her, and in him. The warrior, for all his fierceness, trembled beneath those fragile fingers. Coinneach, she whispered. I want you to find happiness here, he said, with a firmness that sounded like a vow. That this place may be your home. Nòraid swallowed, her voice barely forming. I would only wish that you call me Lilias. That for you, and for your people, that be my name. I do not want them to know the other. Coinneach's eyes softened. Then you shall be Lilias, he murmured, his voice so low it seemed to caress her skin. Beautiful and sweet. A shiver ran through her at his words. What else, Lilias, he whispered. Ask, and it shall be given. She closed her eyes, swallowing the knot that constricted her throat. When she opened them, she understood that her heart had surrendered completely. Never had anyone spoken to her with such tenderness. Never had she desired a man's love so fiercely. But she did not dare ask for it. Nothing more, she lied, in a thread of a voice. Her gaze, however, betrayed her. She could not tear it from his mouth. Heat devoured her, her chest burned with a longing impossible to conceal. Coinneach's thumb brushed her lips and her breath broke. She closed her eyes, tilted her head back, letting herself drift. He leaned down, ready to kiss her, but stopped. He had brought her there with a single purpose, in a rush of desire. And yet now he could not. 2 women had been destroyed in his life, his mother and his wife. Would he have the strength to condemn a third? Ah, child, he murmured, his heart at war with itself. If you keep looking at me like that. She opened her eyes, with an innocence as dangerous as it was deliberate. Like that, how, she whispered, her tongue barely moistening her lips. He swallowed, his voice breaking. As though you were waiting for something. He wrapped an arm around her waist and drew her to him. And if I were, she challenged, her voice trembling, what would you do? The challenge gleamed in her eyes. Coinneach felt his heart pound like a war drum. She was tempting him beyond endurance. And he, damned, was not noble enough to resist. He held her close, letting her feel how much he wanted her. He leaned in, only a few inches, waiting. He wanted it to be she who decided. He had desired her from the instant he first saw her. He understood it now with brutal clarity. And seeing her look at him like that, those lips trembling with yearning, tore him apart. My God, he thought, trembling. If she does not step away now. She did not step away. What would you do? She repeated, her voice low, burning. He lost his breath. Need roared through his veins like a flooded river. And still, in a final attempt to protect her, he warned in a broken voice. If you do not leave now, Lilius, I will show you what a MacCoinnich does when a woman looks at him that way. But instead of fleeing, she leaned closer. And then he knew he was lost. Chapter 33. A fragile symbol. An eternal oath. Nòraidh could not hold herself back. May God have mercy on her soul. She knew what she was asking for, and where that impulse would drag her. But the longing to feel that man's lips upon hers was devouring her alive. She tilted her head back, a silent gesture, almost a plea. She closed her eyes and prayed with all the strength of her heart that he might desire her as well. Coinneach's growl, rough and deep, was to her like a celestial hymn, an echo of shared desire. His hand, which at first held her chin, slid to her cheek in a caress so tender that Nòraidh had to fight the sudden urge to weep. Then his fingers sank into the nape of her neck, and a shiver ran through her from head to toe. A sigh, poised between joy and fear, escaped her lips. Heavens above, she murmured, barely audible. The first brush of their mouths unleashed a wild pounding in Nòraidh's chest. It was a sweet kiss, yet laden with an intensity that stole her breath and made her knees tremble. She clung to him in desperation, while he answered with an overwhelming force that left her no escape, not even the will to seek one. The entire world faded away, until nothing remained but that instant. Coinneach's lips claimed hers with a fierce tenderness, and each touch seemed to promise eternity. He drew her closer to his chest, as if fearing the whole universe might tear her from him. I need you, he whispered, his voice broken, as though the confession itself were tearing him apart. Nòraidh could not answer. Her moist eyes spoke for her. He rested his forehead against hers and in a thread of a voice asked, Do you want me to stop? No, she answered without hesitation, with a tremor that was more fire than fear. Coinneach's face lit with a wild gleam. With a sudden movement he lifted her into his arms, and Nòraidh stifled a cry of surprise, clutching his shoulders. Her heart hammered in her chest like a war drum, as he carried her to the fur-covered bed, where he laid her down with reverence as if she were a treasure. Standing before her, he slipped out of his tunic. The sight of his body, imposing in the dim light, filled her with a mix of awe and trembling. Her breath caught. Coinneach leaned closer, with a smile heavy with pride and desire, and whispered, Now, Mocree, let me show you how deeply I yearn for you. Nòraidh felt the world fracture beneath the weight of those words. His voice, so deep and so true, was a promise and a surrender all at once. Their lips met again, this time with a fervor that consumed her. She answered without reserve, following his lead, discovering within herself a new, intoxicating power, the power to give him pleasure, the power to belong to him. For an instant, the warrior relinquished control. He drew her over him, looking up at her with dark eyes that seemed to beg and challenge at once. I am yours, he declared with a crooked smile. Do with me whatever you wish. Nòraidh remained still, incredulous. The echo of those words pierced her soul. Then, as if carried by a force older than either of them, she smiled with a radiance that set Coinneach's gaze alight. Anything, she asked, barely a whisper. Anything, he affirmed, never breaking eye contact, as one who surrenders his fate. The silence that followed burned. Their eyes met, and in that crossing there was no doubt at all, there was no turning back. The outer world vanished completely. Only the two of them remained, given over to a destiny that neither heaven nor earth could any longer contain. Coinneach's hands slowly withdrew from her face and wandered, restless as errant wings, over her shoulders, descending in trembling caresses until they came to rest upon her chest. The contact was at once reverent and incendiary, and for an instant Nòraidh believed her heart could not withstand such heat. Their lips met again, and that kiss, deep, unbreakable, filled with tenderness and strength, seemed to tear her soul from her body. It was a kiss that spoke of surrender and destiny, of passion and eternity. Nòraidh gave herself to him without reserve, with a fervor that stole his breath. Her surrender was absolute, and each of her movements answered his with the cadence of a secret music, as though two ancient melodies had finally found their harmony. Coinneach found himself mastered by a fierce longing, a desire that roared in his chest like an untamed fire. He wanted to merge with her, to seal that bond in a way both total and irrevocable. Yet at the same time he fought to contain himself, resisting with fury the temptation to be swept beyond all control. He gazed at her above him, with the grace of a Celtic goddess and the tenderness of a maiden. Her eyes, veiled with passion, opened suddenly and met his. In that instant, Coinneach felt every wall he had built around his heart over the years collapse. There, in the deep depths of that gaze, he found what he had sought in vain all his life. Everything. His hand slid down to her belly, as though fearing the miracle might vanish if he ceased to touch her. Nòraigh's body moved with a gentle, enchanting rhythm, like a siren's song inviting him to surrender, to give her all that he was and all that he possessed. Coinneach fought with all his strength. He wanted to give her pleasure first, to see on her face the light of fulfillment. But his will shattered with every moan that escaped Nòraigh's lips, with every shiver that ran through her body. "Do you feel it?" he murmured in a rough, broken voice as the tremor shook him. The breathless sound with which she answered drove him to the brink of ruin. He closed his eyes, vainly trying to flee the vertigo, but the silent pleas of his body and his soul dragged him beyond all reason. "Come," he begged, broken, with a groan that was both plea and command at once. "Come, before I lose myself entirely." Nòraigh's body enveloped him with an intensity that tore him apart, and freed him at the same time. He tried to resist, to pull away, but she held him fast with fierce determination. "Yes," she whispered, trembling, with a luminous defiance. "Yes." And then Coinneach fell. The wave swept over him without mercy, and with a cry that was half prayer, half curse, he surrendered to that relentless ecstasy. He clutched her against his chest with trembling strength, feeling his whole being pour into her, as though in that instant he had given not only his body, but his entire destiny. First came an almost painful gratitude, then a blinding emotion so pure and overwhelming that he could scarcely bear it. In that moment he knew that he loved her with a force neither time nor gods could ever break. Nòraidh collapsed against him, exhausted, and he wrapped her in his arms with desperate fervor. He stroked her hair and in silence swore that he would never allow harm or darkness to reach her. He would protect that woman even if it cost him his life, even if his soul were lost forever. He held her close, like a castaway clinging to the only plank that might save him, and did not let her go. And so, entwined with one another, spent and undone, sleep finally claimed them, while the Celtic night settled over them like an eternal mantle. Chapter 34. Voices of Women. That chamber always dragged him back to the same torment. The delirium was born in that uncertain half-light that enveloped him as soon as the candle breathed its last, with the fatal hiss of the flame as it died. In that threshold between sleep and waking, a strange glow seeped in from the corridor. At first a faint gleam, a suggestive shimmer that invited him to leave the blankets and peer into what was forbidden. Coinneach never did. Then the screams began, women's voices crying for mercy, tearing the night apart with desperate pleas. Coinneach would curl beneath the sheets while outside a procession of shadows and torches passed by, hurried footsteps, echoes of flight. And suddenly he was a child again, barely 2 years old, trapped between memory and nightmare. In the dream those screams were his mother's. Beyond the door the light intensified until it blinded, like a beacon in the darkness of the corridor, while he lay trembling, drenched in sweat and fear. The cries grew unbearable, until at the far end of the passage a door slammed shut, and with it darkness plunged into the house and into his own chest. The little boy squeezed his eyelids shut with all his strength and wished for silence. He wished for it with every fibre of his being. Again and again. And silence came. An irrevocable silence. Suddenly he was no longer a child, but an infant in someone else's arms, lulled by a melody that seemed to rise from a forgotten dream. Before him, a pair of blue eyes gazed at him with tenderness. "Sleep, my little one, my sweet child," murmured a voice like an ancient chant, almost from another world. Coinneach woke with a jolt, his lashes soaked and his heart racing. The chamber was cool, but his brow burned slick with sweat. He was not alone. Not this time. In the oppressive dimness there was human warmth, a steady breath, life. The warm body lying in his arms anchored him to certainty. They were nothing but nightmares. He forced himself to breathe deeply to rein in his wild pulse while he reviewed each fragment of the dream. Something new had surfaced within him, a lullaby, familiar eyes. But whose? To whom did that voice belong, the one that had haunted him for as long as he could remember? In the past, Coinneach used to wake immersed in absolute silence, a guilty, thunderous silence. Not that night. This time there was a faint glow, the trembling light of a candle, and the soft murmur of a woman's breathing. His wife's breathing. The thought tore him free of the nightmare and drew a smile from him. And as his senses slowly stirred, he heard another sound, distant and mysterious, the ethereal lament of a flutist lost in the night. Without hesitation, he slipped free of the drowsy embrace that held him and moved into the gloom, following the call of that music. Nòraidh, restless, did not know what had broken her sleep. It was the brush of the door as it closed that fully returned her to wakefulness. Disoriented, she turned at once toward the empty bed. Coinneach's warmth still lingered in the sheets, and when she laid her palm on the place where he had lain, she caressed it with devotion, as if she wished to draw into her skin whatever remained of him. Had she truly believed herself immune to his influence? How had she dared to think she would emerge unscathed? The truth forced itself upon her with brutal clarity. The man had breached the walls that protected her, those defenses that had kept her safe and alone. Some time ago Nòraidh had sworn not to yearn for love or approval, those uncontrollable gifts that never came. She had decided to belong to herself, even if it cost her her father's scorn. She believed she did it out of pride, out of rebellion, but now she understood the root of it. She was furious with him. She always had been. Did she now have the courage to open her heart without reserve? To risk believing that Coinneach loved her when no one ever had? She bit her lip hard, stifling a sob, wishing with all her soul that it was so. The room, even in darkness, reflected her nakedness back to her, severe walls without ornament, without any trace of the man with whom she had shared the bed. The man whom, despite everything, she dared to love. She knew that Coinneach MacCoinnich adored his clan with ferocity, and his son with even greater devotion. But who was he in the deepest part of himself? What secrets lay hidden in those silences, and in the shadows that besieged him in his dreams? As she searched for answers, her ears caught the distant melody. The flute wept in the night, its broken lament spilling over the stones of the keep like the cry of a restless soul. Driven by unease and curiosity, Nòraidh rose and, groping for her clothes, decided to follow the trail of that music that seemed to be calling her. Chapter 35. Lilius. "Father!" Arhane exclaimed when he saw him. The boy ran toward him like a bursting torrent, and threw himself into his arms with a radiant smile and eyes alight with joy. Coinneach let out a hearty laugh as he crushed him against his chest. He embraced him without reserve, with the proud strength of a man unafraid to show his love. "Blanid told me I mustn't bother you," the little one complained with a playful pout. "She said I wasn't allowed to go wake you." Coinneach's expression widened at such a serious protest, coming from such innocent lips. "Did she now?" "Yes," Arhane replied, wrapping his chubby arms around his neck with all the strength he could muster. "I want you to carry me on your shoulders, father." "As you wish, little laird." The boy laughed like a delighted rascal, nearly choking him with enthusiasm. When he finally loosened his grip, Coinneach settled him on his shoulders and waited until he held on securely before moving toward the men of the clan gathered nearby. "Just look at that," he murmured more to himself than to his son. "It seems they've all come." "Yes, father, but don't worry, no one wanted to begin without you." "I see that," Coinneach replied in a jovial tone, thanking him with a conspiratorial gesture. "Ah, don't thank me," Arhane answered with mischievous solemnity. "I just told them you hadn't been able to contain yourself." Coinneach nearly choked in surprise. "What did you say? What exactly did you tell them?" "Thomas agreed with me too." "Thomas?" His father raised a brow. "Yes. He said you've been without a woman for far too long." Coinneach stifled a laugh, though he was already promising himself to settle accounts with Thomas for his heir's precociousness. The boy knew far too much for his age. But then he thought that perhaps it was not such a bad thing. The MacCoinnich had never enjoyed the privilege of a long childhood. They were born already bearing the weight of the clan on their shoulders, with the shadow of their ancestors watching over them. Though he had sworn to preserve his son's childhood, he knew fate granted no reprieve. One day, Arhane would have to be stronger than his years. In any case, he began searching for words. "Don't worry, father," the boy interrupted, lacing his little fingers beneath Coinneach's chin, and resting his own chin atop his father's head. Coinneach closed his eyes for a moment to savor the sensation, aware that soon it would be nothing more than a memory. He sighed, both bitter and tender. "I understand," the child added conspiratorially. Coinneach frowned. "Do you really, my son?" "Of course. I too have been without a woman for far too long." Coinneach choked again, this time with no air in his lungs, unsure whether to laugh or despair. "You, without a woman?" "Yes," Arhane affirmed with conviction. "I think it would be lovely to have a lass who would sing me a lullaby now and then." His father burst into laughter, unable to resist an innocence that disarmed even the hardest warrior. He gave him an affectionate pat on the leg and kept walking, still smiling. "Father," Arhane said again. "Yes, son." "I was wondering if Lady Nòraidh has sung you any songs to help you sleep." Coinneach blinked, taken aback by the innocence of the question. "I heard Angus say she must be very good, in bed." For an instant Coinneach was struck mute. The statement had been delivered with such candor that it pierced his chest like a sweet sharp dart. Remembering the truth quickened his heart and warmed his face. Yes, it had been a song, not a lullaby but one of moans and sighs as intense as the pulse of life itself. But that was not something he could say to his son. "Yes, Arhane," he replied at last, clearing his throat. "She sings better than any woman I have ever known." "I knew it, father. I'm sure she sings better than Angus." Coinneach stopped short, gaping. "Angus?" "Yes," Arhane nodded, convinced. "He sang me a lullaby too." "By St. Columba's beard!" Coinneach exclaimed, unable to hold back his laughter. "And when, in heaven's name, did such a thing occur to him?" The boy wrinkled his nose, thoughtful. "I don't know, father, but he did. I don't remember when, but I'm sure of it." "May the gods strike me down," Coinneach murmured as he resumed his steps toward the gathered crowd. "There is much about my own cousin that I do not know." "Father," the child's voice broke in, hesitant. "Yes, my son." "I was wondering something else. Does Nòraidh sing better than my mother?" The world came to a halt around Coinneach. An invisible pressure crushed his chest, and the air turned harsh in his throat. He forced himself to swallow that knot of thorns before answering, with as much truth as he could muster. "I don't know, Arhane. I never heard your mother's voice in song." "Oh." A single syllable, yet steeped in disappointment. Coinneach felt it like a dagger sinking into his heart. "Father, you're squeezing my leg," Arhane protested, a hint of pain in his voice. Coinneach snapped back to himself at once, loosening his grip immediately. He drew a sharp breath through clenched teeth, his soul torn open. "Forgive me, my son. And then, lying with tenderness, he added in a firm voice so the boy would believe every word, "Of course your mother would have sung for you, if the fates had allowed it." "Do you really think so, father?" Arhane asked, with a spark of hope that burned him from within. "I don't think so, my son, I know it. Had she seen your face, had she heard your laughter, she would have filled the tower with songs for you alone." "I would have liked that so much," the boy sighed. Coinneach clenched his jaw, closing his eyes. "May the hells feast upon Isabel's soul, damn her." "And you, father?" the child asked, suddenly innocent as a beam of moonlight. "Did your mother sing you lullabies?" Coinneach opened his eyes. The blaze of the great fire burned before him, its glow seeming to demand an answer. He inhaled deeply. "No," he said at last, his voice rough, as though tearing the word from an open wound. And in that instant, he understood the full weight of that inherited silence. His mother's death had been a taboo, a wall of stone raised by his father and upheld by the entire clan. Never a name, never a memory spoken aloud. As if her very mention would shatter some ancestral vow. All he knew of her he owed to Blathnid's kindness, and even that was no more than a handful of crumbs. He himself had stopped asking, resigned to the void. "Father." Artair's voice pulled him from his torment. "Yes, Artair." "Do you think she would be angry, if I called Nòraidh mother?" Coinneach stopped dead frozen. That innocent question struck him like a lance in the midst of battle, piercing without mercy the walls of his heart. "I think you would do well to call her Lilias," Coinneach said. Nòraidh shuddered. She had heard more than she should have. It had not been her intention to spy, but she had, and now tears blurred her eyes. Should she reveal herself or flee like a shadow? The flutist's music and the glow of the flames guided her to the narrow slit in the wall, the only window of the dark chamber. Between fire and shadow she made out father and son, bent toward one another, speaking in low voices as though sharing a secret. An intimacy she had never known in her own childhood, though she had always longed for it. She stifled the sting of envy that tried to rise in her chest. The fire burned before them like a beacon in the night, and the flutist, with his deep, mournful tone, seemed to draw notes so profound from the wood that Nòraidh's feet moved of their own accord, carrying her toward Coinneach and Arhane. At last they saw her. For a long moment she could not find her voice, the child's innocent question had moved her to the core. But as they both watched her in silence, she forced herself to speak. "You may call me whatever you wish," she murmured. Her voice trembled, but she held herself upright. "Nòraidh is fine." Coinneach studied her with a steady gaze that pierced her. "I thought you preferred Lilias," he replied gravely. Nòraidh drew in a breath and held it. Then she lifted her face and met his eyes with the same firmness. "So did I thought so, until now." A strange clarity suddenly wrapped around her, as though she were uncovering something long forgotten. Her name was not a chain nor a mark of shame, but a badge earned with blood and endurance. It was proof of what she had borne, and that she was still standing. Proud. Unbroken. That was the cruelest revenge against her father, to live well, to walk upright, to laugh without fear. "I have decided," she added, curving her lips in a nearly defiant gesture, "that after all, I like my name." Coinneach's stern features softened. His lips, firm as stone, lifted into an unexpected smile. "Truly?" "Yes." Nòraidh's reply was swift, almost insolent. She raised one brow and answered with a spark in her eyes. "I'm sure." Her heart stirred with a strange exultation, fierce, inexplicable, and yet luminous. Coinneach smiled more broadly. Even in the dimness, she caught the glint in his eyes, like living embers. To ward off that sudden emotion, Nòraidh turned her gaze toward the crowd. "What are they doing?" she asked softly. Coinneach did not stop looking at her. "It is for Chan." Nòraidh turned back to him. The light caressed his face, hard and noble, where the first silver strands at his temples contrasted with the youthful strength of his features. Her heart tightened. "Our way of bidding him a final farewell," Coinneach said. Then Nòraidh understood. A few paces from the fire stood a rough wooden pyre. Her smile vanished into a grimace of horror. "By heaven! You mean to burn him? That is so, lass, he answered calmly. That is barbarity. Poor Ichan. Coinneach let out a brief joyless laugh. Perhaps my foot. There is no other way, Nòraid, Coinneach said then. It was the first time he had spoken her name with such gentleness. Nòraid felt it on her skin like a caress. Her heart clenched at the unexpected tenderness in his voice. The rock allows no burial, he explained gravely. Creag Duv rests upon foundations so hard that no spade could ever conquer them. Nòraid fell silent, giving a slight nod. Coinneach turned his gaze toward the keep rising behind them like a spear of stone against the sky. The walls of my house were raised from this same rock so long ago, that even my ancestors no longer remember whose hands set those stones. And they still stand. Nòraid followed his gaze. It is astonishing. He, however, was not looking at the tower. He was looking at her. Proud, upright, chin lifted and lips firm, she seemed taller, more radiant, as though she had grown before his eyes. The compassion he had once thought he felt now seemed ridiculous. There was nothing in her that inspired pity, she was pure strength, a living challenge. And that name she now embraced began to please him as well. Nòraid's face shone in the light of the flames, and in that brightness there was something new, hard to name. Something that strengthened him and unsettled him. And Coinneach's heart burned too with a strange fire, warm, deep yearning. A flame he feared to accept fully, lest one day upon waking he should find on the young woman's face not gratitude, but scorn. He had sworn to protect her. He had sworn to care for her. But to fall in love. That was a risk he could not allow himself. Chapter 36. The pyre, and the great central fire. The funeral stretched deep into the night. Each member of the clan, in their own way, paid a final tribute to the unfortunate Ichan. Then it was Coinneach who lit a torch from the great central fire, and set the pyre alight. Ichan's mother was torn apart by sobs, others' eyes reddened wept in silence. Most stood motionless, their faces hardened by grief. A solitary piper tore a funeral melody from the wind, hypnotic and heart-rending, and as if drawn by an enchantment, some began to dance, their steps strangely festive, in time with that lament. Nòraid watched the rise of the flames with a mixture of revulsion and wonder. The fire climbed the pyre, until it embraced the body shrouded in new blankets. Even when the first tongue of flame reached the platform, she could not look away. She found herself distant, as though what she was witnessing did not belong to her. The howl of the wind and the roar of the flames smothered the music for a moment, and everything else vanished. There was only the fire devouring the body, and the embers that, as they broke free, took flight like incandescent feathers. Weightless shadows drifting upward, beyond the rosy glow of the flames, until they were lost in the blackness of the night. Nòraid imagined herself as one of those wandering ashes, and felt her spirit rise with them. She lifted her face toward the moonless sky, and for an instant she floated in nothingness, free. Freedom, the thing she had longed for with all her soul for as long as she could remember. Or was it something else her heart had secretly sought? Had she wished deep down, for her father to reach out a hand to steady her lost soul and draw it against his chest? Her gaze settled on a fleck of ash, spinning in the wind. If she could fly far away, if she could land wherever she chose, where would she fall? The murmur of children's voices tore her from her thoughts. Below, Arhane and a group of children were laughing as they tried to catch the drifting fragments of ash with their little hands. Nòraid watched them as if from another world. The children gathered, with the innocence of a game, the last remains of Ichan mixed with bits of charred wood. They ran back and forth laughing while soot blackened their cheeks and fingers. Then one by one, they carried their spoils to Ichan's mother. With solemn tenderness they placed the ash in her open hands, as though into a sacred chalice. Nòraid smiled when she saw that when Artair's turn came, nothing fell from his hands, only the black dust clinging to his skin. The boy shrugged and gently brushed his little fingers across the woman's palm, leaving the dark smudge behind. She received it with a broken smile, and after whispering a few words to the child, lifted her hands toward the sky. She opened them, letting the wind carry the ashes away once more. Then she pressed the remaining soot to her chest, as though keeping the last trace of her lost son within her flesh. And she wept again. Nòraidh's eyes filled with tears as well. In that moment, she understood with a shiver that true love knows neither chains nor selfishness. That simple gesture, a mother returning to the heavens what she loved most, was the purest proof of it. Chapter 37. The hot water was a relief. The kitchen reeked of the acrid stench of lye. The steam rising from the cauldrons mingled with those corrosive fumes, and the air, thick and suffocating, seemed capable of tearing the lungs from anyone who dared enter the small stone building. And yet everyone remained inside, obeying Nòraidh's instructions with the diligence of those eager for a cure. No one was under any illusions. They were doing it because they dreamed of finally ridding themselves of the fleas, and gratitude, as always, worked miracles. Nòraidh had woken alone in a dim room. Coinneach had disappeared without a trace. She barely had time to lament it before Blanid burst in, cheerful and determined, announcing that it was already time to rise. By the Almighty, Nòraidh could have hated her, if it weren't for the fact that the woman was far too honest and kind to inspire hostility. She brought her a clean tunic, insisting it had never belonged to Coinneach's wife. Nòraidh eyed her with suspicion until Blanid, blushing, confessed that long ago, when she was younger and thinner, it had been hers. The Englishwoman couldn't help smiling, a genuinely generous gesture. Nòraidh had never cared much for her dresses, but she could not suppress a shiver when she discovered that even this tunic was infested with fleas. It was then she made her decision: the MacCoinnich clan would be freed from this plague. Remembering what she had done in MacAilpein years ago, she threw herself into the task with the determination of one waging a crusade. With Blathnid's help, she gathered men and women, and began boiling their clothes in the large iron cauldrons. The kitchen boiled with both sweat and smoke. Some watched the strange ritual suspiciously, others volunteered to help. When Nòraidh decided to wash Beithan's dog, the main source of the infestation, a murmur of disbelief arose. "By my soul, she's about to wash the dog," one exclaimed. "May lightning strike me, she really means to wash it," added another. "Saxon witchcraft to chase away the fleas," muttered a third in Gaelic. Nòraidh did not stop or offer any explanation. It seemed perfectly natural to her. What was strange was that no one had done it before. Smiling, she plunged Florade into a tub of soapy water, and rubbed the matted coat until she feared the poor creature might go bald. The animal offered no resistance. It arched like a contented cat and surrendered to the bath grateful. Without a doubt, the parasites had tormented it so much that even hot water was a relief. When she finished, Nòraidh tasked Arhane and a friend with hunting down the last rebellious fleas. She taught them how to spot them, caught a few in front of their eyes, and then let the children, laughing, pretend they were chasing those dirty MacAilpein hiding in MacCoinnich lands. She emptied the tub, and began refilling it with hot water. Her plan was more ambitious. If she could bathe the ogre and his gang, the plague would be defeated. Of course, to convince them, she would need all the persuasion she could muster. But before she could give any orders, the crowd had anticipated her. When she looked again, it was too late. The men had stripped off their clothes and stood naked in line, ready to dive into the water as if it were a pagan ritual. Nòraidh stifled a scream at the sight of that parade of bare flesh. She pressed her hand to her face, scandalized, letting out a small moan. Good heavens, these Scots knew nothing of modesty. She had never seen men undress so quickly. Well, she had, but never without some lascivious intent. Between her slightly parted fingers, she glimpsed the last man removing his tunic and plaid before throwing them into the cauldron, and her blush had nothing to do with the steam saturating the kitchen. She thought she could carry on alone, but now she was completely mortified. She had seen naked men before. Her father and brothers had never hesitated in her presence, and she had planned to wash Beithan's dog, but this was different. Too much. She looked around. The other women seemed perfectly calm. Some, thank heaven, showed a more reserved modesty, but none was scandalized by the tide of naked bodies filling the room as she was. Nòraidh growled inwardly and squeezed her eyes shut. She had two options: flee screaming and look like a fool, or uncover her eyes and finish what she had started. She massaged her temples, feigning a sudden headache. Chapter 38. The clan's cry. Coinneach did not know whether to kiss her until she was breathless, or to lash that insolent perfect backside with fury. He had missed her more than he ever thought possible. Only a few hours had passed since he had glimpsed her face among the sheets, and yet the emptiness had become unbearable. Now she was there, in the doorway of the kitchen, hands firm on her hips, watching the scene as though witnessing a delirium. His men, naked as the day they were born, moved around a steaming cauldron, laughing and chattering like a circle of gossips. By all the saints! Neither he nor his men had ever been overly modest, but this bordered on the grotesque. How was it possible that every time he left Nòraidh alone for just a few minutes, he found them stripped bare? If the girl weren't so obviously flustered, he might have suspected it was all a trick of hers. Yet he had never seen his men so joyous in their indecency. The first clue of the mystery was Florai's soaked back, being scrutinized by Arhane and young Niall. The second, the acrid stench of lye and the mountain of clothes bubbling in the cauldron. The last, his son's exultant cry. A flea! Here, he shouted, holding up 2 fingers like a trophy. I don't see anything, Niall replied, frowning. Coinneach wavered between gratitude and anger. Part of him wanted to acknowledge the woman's devotion, her willingness to rid the clan of the plague. But the other part boiled with fury at seeing her amid a crowd of naked men, oblivious to the temptation they represented. Christ above, it took all his restraint not to throw each of them into the boiling cauldron with all their clothes. His gaze fixed on Nòraidh, expectant, until Beithan's backside advanced dangerously in his direction. Then reason blurred. With a growl, he strode across the room. At the sight of him, Beithan stopped, and silence fell over the kitchen. Nòraidh, however, did not notice his arrival. She was still covering her eyes with a trembling hand. Only when he grabbed her arm firmly did she startle. She let out a squeal as he dragged her out of the kitchen. Wait, she protested. I haven't finished yet. Oh, you have finished, he replied, his voice sharp as steel. I must bathe Beithan, she insisted, making no attempt to flee. I assure you no, he said, each word like a hammer blow. But the fleas. The fleas, he repeated bitterly without slowing his pace. That boy has been bathing himself for 24 years. I swear he'll manage without your help. He pushed her out of the kitchen, under the amused gazes of the others. Inside, the smiles vanished as soon as the door closed behind them. Idiots, muttered Angus to Blanid, venom in his voice. The woman's serene expression faltered. She looked at the boy she had raised from infancy and spoke sadly. Angus, can't you for once be happy for him? Don't you see how much he has suffered? A dark gleam burned in the young man's eyes. And I, he said bitterly. Have I not suffered as well? Angus, she pleaded, almost a whisper, he is your. We know very well who he is, he interrupted disdainfully. Our son? Blanid sighed. Have I not given you all my love? He looked at her without mercy, and she bowed her head, defeated. At least remember that he is your laird. You cannot speak of him like that. Angus leaned toward her ear, a grimace more like an open wound. My brother, my laird. Just saying it poisons me. What have I received from him? Everything he could give you, she replied, holding back a sob. The only thing I have ever wanted in this life, he said, voice broken with anger, is to be able to mourn my mother. You cannot, Blanid warned. He knows nothing. As always, Angus spat, the only thing that matters is what he knows, what he feels. It was the old laird's wish, she reminded him in a thread of a voice. And my father's wish? Who listened to that? That bastard killed him because my mother had the crime of loving him. It was an accident, Angus, she murmured, trembling. An accident, he roared. And you still defend it. The old laird was shattered by Tormod MacGillen's death. Anger clouded his judgment. Can you not find forgiveness in your heart? Forgiveness, he laughed bitterly. After he denied the child of your own sister, blood of your blood. Blanid fell silent, overwhelmed. He gave you everything, Angus, she said finally, voice broken. You never lacked for anything. I lacked everything, he retorted fiercely, and you never wanted to see it. She shook her head, lamenting. I should not have told you the truth. But you did, he spat, eyes burning. And by God I will right this wrong. Blathnid's gaze sought his, full of fear. What do you intend to do? Don't commit madness, Angus. He turned toward the darkness of the corridor, his voice a sharp edge. I intend to deliver justice. And he walked away, muttering dark promises that sounded like an omen. Chapter 39. The same window. Wherever Nòraid set foot, it seemed that trouble followed her like a shadow. She had vowed to avoid any new, embarrassing situations, and so she decided that the next day she would remain confined to Coinneach's chamber. But in the middle of the night, an idea began gnawing at her mind, to restore that very room, high up in the tower. She awoke at dawn with the task imprinted on her heart, determined to complete it before the laird returned. She waited until he departed and called for Blanid and Beithan. She filled buckets with water and carried them upstairs. She scrubbed the floors with almost furious energy, erasing every trace of dust. Then she turned to the walls, stripping soot and grime that had accumulated over years from the stone. Blanid took charge of washing the clothes and linens. But little could be done to bring warmth to that room, as austere as a monk's cell. There were no tapestries to hang on the walls, no rugs to soften the chill that seeped from the stone, eternal even under a bright sun. Then she realized what was the only thing capable of giving life back to the place: light. She approached the boarded-up window, determined to tear away those rough, heavy planks. At first glance they looked haphazardly nailed, as if no one had thought they would remain there forever. The time had come to remove them. She crouched, tried to pry with her fingers, but soon realized she would need help. Beithan, she called. Silence. Beithan. Looking around, she discovered he had vanished. Startled, she found Blanid at the far end of the room, motionless, holding the sheets tight to her chest, eyes brimming with fear. Where has he gone? I need his strength to open the window. Oh, daughter. Blanid whispered, her voice shaken. You shouldn't do it. Nòraid glanced at the half-open door, as if fearing prying ears. She frowned. Why? I don't understand. Is there really a reason this window must remain blind? Yes, there is, the woman stammered, stepping back. Her answer was as hesitant as it was intense. What is it? Nòraid pressed, brow raised. The drop is deep, far too deep. A flimsy excuse. Nòraid twisted her mouth. It's for Arthur, Blanid finally added, letting the sheets fall on the bed. The boards were put up to keep him safe. I understand, they did it when he was a child. Yes, Blanid hurried to say, as if relieved to see her reaction. But Nòraid furrowed her brow. He's grown now. There's no reason to keep this shadowed prison. She pressed her hands against the wood. A single ray of sun will transform this place into a home. The first plank gave way with a snap. It crashed to the floor, and a beam of light pierced the gloom, illuminating dust and stone as if they were gold. Perfect, Nòraid murmured, thrilled. The sun will dry the walls and warm this chamber. When she looked back, Blanid had disappeared without a sound. The young woman shrugged, strange yes, but no reason to stop. She continued pulling plank after plank, determined to restore light to that room condemned to darkness. Coinneach was repairing the pen wall when Beithan came running up to him. He babbled incoherently about scrubbed floors and open windows, grave enough for the laird to abandon his task immediately. As he climbed the tower he passed Blanid, and seeing her pale face, understood what the boy had been trying to warn him about. He climbed the steps 2 at a time. Too late. When he opened the door to his chamber, he froze as if struck in the chest. The room, once shadowed, was flooded with light. The sun poured over the walls and planks, turning the stone into golden fire. And there, standing by the open window, was Nòraid. In an instant he was pulled into the past. The girl leaned toward the wind, her hair alight with the sun, and in Coinneach's mind he did not see Nòraid but Hygeia. He felt again the weight of the newborn son in his arms, and the searing emptiness that had followed that cursed day. The same window. The same light. The same reckless gesture at the edge of the abyss. His heart pounded violently in his chest. Sweat beaded his forehead. No. Not again. He swore, with a fury that overwhelmed him, that he would not allow it. Nòraid had never seen anything so dazzling. Not even in her wildest dreams had she imagined a landscape of such grandeur. From the heights the vastness of a lake stretched beyond the cliff, an endless expanse of blue. From the valley, that horizon had seemed only the gentle slope of a hill, yet on the other side awaited wonder. The wind roared in her ears like a wild song, and the sun bathed her face with the warmth of a divine caress. She stood still, dazzled, inhaling the freshness of the air, the sweetness of the breeze scented with wild heather, the warmth of the light on her skin. Everything felt more alive, more intense, as if she had awakened in a new world. How could they have had the audacity to seal that window? That prison of planks was almost a sacrilege against the beauty around her. Blanid had given her a sensible explanation, the safety of a small child. But Nòraid was not a mother, had never guarded a fragile life, and perhaps for that reason could not conceive of depriving herself of such a wonder. Instinctively she leaned forward, trying to capture better the wild fragrance drifting in the air. No. The roar struck her like thunder. Nòraid spun around, hand to her chest. Coinneach had entered the room without her noticing. His figure filled the doorway with dark authority. "You scared me," she murmured, her voice barely a thread. "Step away from that window," he roared, advancing with decisive steps, eyes narrowed, burning with restrained fury. Immediately. The hardness in his gaze made her recoil. It was as if he did not recognize her, as if, for a moment, Nòraid were nothing more than the shadow of an intolerable danger. "I said step away from that cursed window," he thundered again. Before she could react, Coinneach lunged forward and grabbed her roughly by the arm, dragging her without care into the room. "You're hurting me," Nòraid protested, a groan of pain escaping her. But he did not listen. The gold of his eyes blazed like wild, terrible fire. In a sudden impulse, he pushed her onto the bed. She fell onto her back, dazed, and instinctively crawled to the other end, keeping her distance, watching him with fear. "Who gave you permission to tear down those boards?" he bellowed, his voice thick with fierce rage that tore the air. Nòraid stared at him, speechless, heart racing. She did not recognize this man. She had never seen him like this, so enraged, so unhinged. At other times, she had been able to draw smiles or irony from him, even in tense moments. But this look, this voice was something else. It was a storm that left her without words. Conscious that she would gain nothing by defying him, she chose the more cautious path, one she had never taken before with her own father. "Coinneach. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize," she stammered, almost pleading softly. She had never been submissive to anyone's authority. But with him, with this man who in his fury seemed another, she felt she had to temper her voice, to wait until the fire in his eyes had subsided before approaching again. Chapter 40. 7 Winters. It was the young woman's expression that pulled him back from the abyss, and forced him to regain his senses. Nòraid huddled on the bed, watching him with the same wary distrust as the first time they had faced each other. There was fear in her eyes, yes, but no hatred. No revulsion. Coinneach faltered, as if he suddenly saw himself reflected in a mirror he did not wish to look into. Christ, it was not Hygeia who had leaned out that window. It was not Hygeia who now made herself small in the corner of the bed, fleeing from his fury. A shiver ran through him. Because in Nòraid's gaze he had just recognized himself, the shadow of an old rage, black as night, buried for years. It was not only anger. It was contempt. Contempt for the woman who had abandoned him, for the mother who had denied her own flesh and blood. Fearing that his eyes might betray him, Coinneach turned his back and sank onto the edge of the bed. His whole body trembled, stiff as a bow drawn to its limit. He stayed there motionless, breathing like a man fighting not to drown, his gaze fixed on the open window. The horizon stretched vast, blue and serene, as if nothing in the world knew his torment. Soon Arhane would turn 7 winters old. 7 winters since that wound that had never healed. He forced himself to look around the room, as if seeing it for the first time after so many years of hatred. It was a prison of memories, walls that held muffled screams, sleepless nights, and nightmares that had haunted him even before Isabel's departure. His wife's death had only fanned the specters that already consumed him. And yet something had changed. A different vibration, a warm breath he did not remember. That same room, once shadowed, now seemed inhabited by an unexpected light. And the difference was there at his back, her presence. Startled, he stifled a gasp when he felt a hand rest on his shoulder. The air caught in his throat, but he did not dare turn. Christ, what could I say to her? She must think him mad. And the terrible part was that he could not blame her for thinking it. Chapter 41. A bad feeling. Coinneach had gone too long without watching the sunset from the window of his own chamber. Even longer since he had last loved a woman, under the fiery glow of the fading light. He had forgotten the sweetness of that moment. More than that, he had never imagined that such fullness could be found in the embrace of another body. Yes, he knew the calm of a satisfied body, that warm peace that settles over a man like the midday sun over a sleepy dog. But never had he believed that the soul itself could find such deep rest. Beside him, exhausted from the day's efforts and the surrender of her love, Nòraidh slept soundly. Coinneach could not restrain himself. His hands sought her with reverence, brushing through her hair as if afraid to profane it. His fingers traced the curves of her body cautiously, a gesture halfway between worship and the fear of waking her. The young woman lay entwined in the sheets, her long limbs abandoned with innocence, copper hair spread like fire over the pillow. Naked, offered without reserve to his gaze, she seemed a nymph plucked from the sacred hills, revealing not only her body but the mystery of her spirit. Coinneach perceived it clearly. This woman had bared to him not only her skin but her entire soul. And his heart, hardened by years of shadows, now overflowed with emotions so intense he could barely contain them. Not all were clear or easy to untangle, they intertwined in the indecipherable knot of his chest. But he knew they were true, and that never in his life had he felt a bond so powerful. Christ, if he could stop time and remain with her like this, as they were in that moment, for all eternity, he would do it without hesitation. So when there was a knock at the door, he felt it as a blasphemy. He remained still, muttering curses and wishing the intruder would leave. But the knocking persisted, and a growl of anger rose from his throat. Carefully he covered Nòraidh's body beneath the blankets to shield her from prying eyes, and rose in silence, moving toward the door. "Beithan," he said, his brow hardened, blocking the entrance with his own body, naked as the day he was born. "Laird," exclaimed the boy, suddenly subdued. "Forgive me, but... damn, it seems today it falls to me to bring bad news." Coinneach glanced toward the bed, where Nòraidh's silhouette rested like a dream, and sighed with impatience. "And now what?" he roared, returning his gaze to Beithan's flushed face. "It's Blanid, sir," the young man answered uneasily. "What's happened with her?" he snapped. Beithan shifted under the weight of his gaze. "She didn't come to dinner. We've looked for her, but she locks herself in her house and refuses to come out." Coinneach frowned. "For God's sake, boy," he huffed, irritated. "Blanid deserves a respite, haven't you thought of that? Look at Nòraidh, she's exhausted. Blanid must be the same. And not one of you grown men thought that—" "She's crying," Beithan interrupted in a low voice. "Crying?" Coinneach repeated, incredulous. "Yes. Hard. You can hear her from outside. And she doesn't want to speak to anyone. She won't even let us in." "And Angus?" he asked, a flash of alarm in his eyes. "We've searched everywhere, but it's no use. She says she doesn't want to see him either." Coinneach could not hide his astonishment. "She refuses to see her own son?" The boy nodded. It's not like her, I know. No. Coinneach murmured sombre. Blanid has never been a woman of spectacle. Not since I've known her. His voice hardened with decision. Go back to her. I will come immediately. As you wish, sir, Beithan nodded, turning away. And don't warn her of my coming, Coinneach ordered sharply. The last thing he wanted was for his aunt to prepare herself to hide her torment. If something was consuming her, Coinneach would drag it into the light. After all she had done for him, the least he could do was bear her grief. A bad feeling ran through him. Why did she not want to see her son? Now that he thought of it, Angus himself had been odd of late. Coinneach had attributed it to the confrontation with old MacGill, and then to Eachan's death. But during the funeral, the young man's absence had been glaring, and even more, his refusal to carry on his shoulders the body of the one he had called brother in life. Coinneach clenched his fists. Too focused on uncovering the traitor among his own, he had closed his eyes to signs that were now obvious. But no longer. If there was a mystery gnawing at his lands and his people, he would resolve it immediately. Better late than never. Chapter 42. The breakwater. Time had become his enemy. The last chance, elusive and longed for, had finally arrived, and he knew he could not let it slip away. Soon the sun would sink behind the hills. And since Arthur would never disobey his father by going to the lovers' promontory after dusk, Angus had been forced to lie to him. He had told him that Coinneach would be waiting for him there as always, atop the rocky ledge. The boy had obeyed without a question, with the trusting innocence of one who knows nothing of treachery. But that deception did not grant him much time. When Arthur discovered that his father was not there, he would grow impatient, and with nightfall he would hurry back, as fast as his short legs could carry him. Everything had to be executed with precision, without room for error. He had not planned to act that night, and yet he had waited. He had watched. He had let the moment ripen, until it reached the perfect edge of tragedy. And now at last, fate was aligning in his favor. Beithan had managed to tear Coinneach away from the arms of his Saxon whore. It was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The story he had prepared was simple, almost natural. It was the first time Nòraidh had been left without supervision. Who would be surprised if the girl tried to flee? And what more logical than for her to take Coinneach's son with her, to offer him as a pledge to her father? No one would suspect anything else. No one except him would know the truth. A truth that would end atop the cliffs, where the rock dies abruptly against the waves. Neither Nòraidh nor Arthur would see the trap until it was too late. A pity. Or rather, justice. With the woman it would be different. Perhaps he would need to break her, force her, drag her to the edge. But the boy would be easy. It would be enough to lift him by those chubby little arms, and hurl him into the void. The mere thought drew a grimace of satisfaction from him. It was not the desire to hear Arthur's screams or desperate pleas. It was rather the weariness, the disgust of seeing every day that face so like Coinneach's. What a sublime tableau. He imagined his brother finding the shattered bodies against the rocks, that of the woman he had dared to love for the second time, and that of his only son, the heir of his blood. Yes, that pain would be unbearable. And Angus yearned for it with all his soul. For what man could endure, after losing two women who had fled from him, and the son who was his pride? 3 destinies bound in a single fall. The cruelest of symmetries. Poetic justice in its purest form. And if misfortune did not drive Coinneach to suicide, Angus himself would see to ending his life. He quickened his pace, swollen with a feverish ardor. He did not know how much longer Coinneach would remain away from his chamber, nor exactly where he was, and he could not afford to be seen climbing the tower stairs. He ascended with agile, steady steps, wrapped in the penumbra of dusk. The towers and halls lay in darkness, not a single torch burned to light the stone. He did not wonder why Blanid had not yet lit the lamps. That detail, far from troubling him, worked in his favor. The moment had come. At last he would put an end to the wrongs of an entire lifetime. he would avenge the father he had never known, the mother who had never cradled him in her womb, and he would punish the brother who, even looking him in the eyes, had never known how to see the truth that bound them. Nòraidh didn't know what had woken her. Perhaps a sound, a brush of movement in the gloom. She opened her eyes and found the room wrapped in a grey twilight, as if shadows had claimed the walls. Still intoxicated by the languor of the afternoon, she stretched lazily and turned in the bed. A scream tried to rise in her throat, but it broke before it could escape. Startled, she sat up sharply and lifted the sheets to cover herself. From the shadowed corner, a figure emerged. "I wasn't sure if I should wake you," said a deep voice. "What are you doing here?" Nòraidh asked, her voice taut as a whip. "It's about the boy," Angus replied, letting his shadow stretch toward her. "Arhane. I wouldn't trouble you if it weren't for him. He's upset." Nòraidh's heart stirred. Above the wariness this man inspired, Arhane's name made her forget all animosity. "What is it? What has happened?" she urged. Angus hesitated, as if the words were too heavy for his mouth. That pause was enough to send fear seeping into her bones. "Tell me," she insisted, her eyes searching in vain for Coinneach around the room. "Where is his father?" Angus knelt beside the bed. He cast a quick glance at the door, then fixed his gaze on her with eyes clouded by genuine panic. "I can't speak with Coinneach. It's him that Arhane fears." "His own father?" Nòraidh frowned in disbelief. "He heard you raise your voice, girl. And he's afraid it will happen again," Angus said, turning his gaze to the window as if the confirmation of his words rested there. Nòraidh shook her head sharply. "No. That's impossible. Arhane would never think such a thing of Coinneach." "And yet he does," Angus replied dryly. Confusion stole her breath. How could such an idea even enter his head? Angus lowered his eyes to the floor, his mouth drawn in a bitter grimace. "Secrets sometimes reveal themselves." The tone sent a shiver down her spine. She clutched the sheets tighter, as if they were a shield. "If he could see you now," he added in a grave voice, "if he could look at you and hear the truth from your lips, he would be convinced there is nothing to fear. Will you go?" "Of course," she said without hesitation. "Where's Arhane?" "He ran to the top of the promontory," he answered. Nòraidh turned toward the window. The pink of the horizon was fading into violet tones, giving way to night. "I'll go at once," she said urgently. "Give me just a moment to dress." "As you wish," Angus replied, standing. But he did not move. His eyes remained fixed on her, on the cloth she held over her chest. Nòraidh felt her cheeks burn under that gaze. "Alone, if you don't mind," she demanded firmly. He scowled, his voice hardened by a resentment he could not conceal. "It did not trouble you to show yourself before Coinneach." But immediately he recovered, as if casting that venom aside. "Very well. I will wait beyond the door. Hurry, girl, night is falling, and I would not have anything happen to the little one." "Nor would I," she replied, shivering at the sudden swing of her emotions. Only when the door closed behind him did she rise from the bed and dress with trembling hands. She did not ignore that Angus despised her, nor that the mere sight of her in Coinneach's bed had fanned his hatred. But the contempt was mutual. She harbored nothing for him but distrust and disgust. None of that mattered now. Only Arhane. For Coinneach's son, she would do anything. Even endure the company of that shadowed man. It was the least she could do for the one who had returned her life. Chapter 43. Fresh tears. As Coinneach crossed the threshold of the small cottage, he found the room as dark as the night outside. No candle burned to defy the shadows. In the center, hunched over the table, Blanid wept, her face buried in her hands. The sight churned his stomach. The woman who had raised him, the fortress of his childhood, reduced to desolate sobs. She still retained her beauty, despite the marks of time and fatigue, and each time he looked at her he could not help but wonder if his own mother's face had been equally noble. "Blanid," he murmured. She lifted her head, startled, and awkwardly wiped away her tears. "Coinneach, darling. What's happened?" she asked, feigning calm as if her own pain did not matter. It was typical of her, always putting the sorrows of others before her own. It never mattered if she were ill, exhausted or worn down. If someone needed her, Blanid was there, tireless. She had cared for everyone, without complaint, especially for Arhane. Coinneach remembered the night of Artane's birth. Even with her lungs weak, Blanid had watched over Isabel tirelessly, wiping the sweat from her brow, moistening her parched lips. That woman's heart had always had room for a child starved for affection, as he had been, as Arhane was. And she had loved them both as if they were her own. A pang of envy pierced him. Christ! How he would have given to hear his mother's voice, yet Angus, who had had her, never showed her respect. He had shied from her caresses, as if ashamed of the very woman who had nursed him. Coinneach closed the door and stepped forward. "I came to find you," he said softly. "It's all right," she replied too quickly, shaking her head. He arched an eyebrow. "It's not, and you know it." Suddenly Blanid broke into a heart-wrenching sob, and hid her face in her hands again. "Oh, Coinneach." He knelt beside her, wrapping an arm protectively around her shoulders. "It can't be that terrible. Tell me, Blanid. Whatever it is, I will fix it." "No," she whimpered, seeking refuge against his chest. "It's done. And time cannot be undone." He frowned, troubled by words he could not fully decipher. Never before had his wise aunt sounded so enigmatic. He stroked her back, trying to comfort her. "Trust me. What has happened?" She trembled with sobs. "Angus was here. We argued." "Over what?" Coinneach inquired. "It cannot be anything we cannot resolve together. Didn't you always teach me that?" Blanid nodded weakly against his shoulder. "What did he do?" "Nothing yet," she replied, standing to wipe her face with her sleeve. "But I don't know what he will do. He is consumed by rage, Coinneach, and he hates you." He looked at her, stunned. "Hates me?" Her expression broke with pain. "With all his being?" "I don't understand." "Oh, Coinneach," she whispered, placing her hand on his shoulder with broken tenderness. "Listen carefully. Angus is not your cousin. He is not my son." He froze. "What are you saying?" "No, it cannot be." Fresh tears ran down Blanid's cheeks. Coinneach's heart, even before his mind, accepted the truth. He knew that woman too well to doubt her word. "Then, who is he?" Blanid caressed his jaw, lifting his face as if he were still a child. "He is your brother," she whispered. The blow struck him like steel. "Impossible." "It is the truth," she affirmed, raising her brows in pleading. "Do you still not understand?" But Coinneach understood nothing. The entire world seemed to have dissolved into confusion and silence. "It was not your coming into the world that took your mother's life," Blanid continued gently, "but Angus's, my dear." She inclined her head with sorrow, and tears welled again in her eyes. "Angus is my sister's son," she said in a solemn voice, placing her hand on Coinneach's trembling face. "May God forgive me, Coinneach, but I swear on my very soul, he is your brother." Chapter 44. She was rejected for her blood, but chosen by her destiny. The growing twilight made vision uncertain, but Angus barely slowed his pace, even as a small figure came running toward them. "Angus!" Arhane shouted, his voice torn. "I couldn't find him. I looked, but I couldn't find him." "Silence, Arhane!" Angus roared, jerking the reins so sharply that the horse snorted angrily and reared. Nòraidh's heart leapt. The beast in its fury had nearly kicked the boy. She held her breath until it calmed and stayed quiet, for doubt began to gnaw at her. Something about this man did not fit, and instinct screamed that she could not trust him. When Angus dismounted with a grim gesture and tore the crossbow from its saddle, Nòraidh's unease turned to certainty. And it was quickly confirmed. "I don't have time to waste," he spat, aiming at the boy. "On the saddle, Arhane." The little boy's face darkened, as if the dusk itself had reached him. His green eyes, until then innocent, widened unnaturally before narrowing with a gravity unfit for his age. Angus, he whimpered, tears clouding his gaze. Nòraid moved to reach him, but Angus's steely voice stopped her. Stand still. She froze as she saw the steel of the weapon turn toward her chest. It did not last long. She was grateful he did not aim at the child again. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and with a coldness barely concealing her fury challenged him. What do you hope to achieve with this? What glory is there in harming your own kin? He's only a child. Angus laughed, joyless. Kin? Yes, my blood, but also my ruin. He is my nephew, not my cousin, and I had no say in how he was to call me. Nothing matters now. He can follow his father to hell. I don't understand. Nòraid murmured. I don't need you to understand. Angus turned the weapon back toward Arhane. Get on the horse, brat. Darkness had swallowed almost everything. Arhane was barely a shadow, motionless, and Nòraid felt a dagger in her chest, imagining the terror paralyzing him. The memory of her own father, cruel and merciless, brought back that frozen cold of her childhood, that numbness that had painted her world in darkness, until Coinneach MacCoinnich had taught her to feel again. And now before her was the son of that man. She would die before allowing Angus to shatter the boy's innocence. Rage inflamed her, pure and bright. What do you hope to gain from all this? She repeated, her voice sharp as drawn steel. Do you think no one will know what you do if you dare harm the boy? Not by my hand, Angus sneered vilely. It will be by yours. Never. Nòraid faced him fiercely. You will not force me. If hands are to be stained with innocent blood, they will be yours, not mine. He growled and barked another order. Get on the mount, Nòraid. She did not move. No. I will fall into the abyss first. The crossbow's steel turned again toward the boy's chest. Nòraid's voice broke in a cry. Arhane. The trembling whisper came like an echo. He was afraid, but resisting. She had seen him endure his father's tirades without tears. He was Coinneach's son without doubt, strong in his silence. Arhane, she whispered, her heart hammering, do you trust me? Why, yes. Then throw yourself to the ground and do not rise no matter what happens. Do you understand? Yes, came the faint reply. Nòraid prayed with all her strength that he obeyed. I don't know what you intend, Angus spat. Bah. I'll just throw him off the cliff when I'm done with you. Oh, really? Nòraid challenged, stepping boldly toward the edge of the precipice. The icy sea wind licked her back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She prayed silently. With each step she took, Angus advanced too, unaware that he was moving away from Arhane. Holy Mary, Mother of God. Nòraid murmured, making the sign of the cross. Pray for us sinners. The villain laughed cruelly. Typical of you, Sassenach. Calling to God when you do not know how to fight like men. Nòraid raised her eyebrows, wounded dignity flaring. But I am not a man. I am a woman. And though fear choked her throat, she clung to the comfort that if she fell she would drag Angus with her. The abyss opened behind her. An involuntary moan escaped her lips as her heels met the void. The moon caught a glint in the man's cruel smile. Then Nòraid let out a piercing scream. Run, Arhane. Run. Angus turned reflexively, raising the crossbow to strike the fleeing boy. It was his mistake. Nòraid lunged at him with all the fury of desperation. They struggled at the edge of the abyss, and she, stumbling, clutched desperately at the only thing she could reach, her enemy's hair. There was an eternal instant in which both hung in nothingness, swinging over the bottomless black. Nòraid squeezed with all her strength. The world shattered in a scream, and together they plunged into the void. Chapter 45. So it was a dream? Coinneach whispered, incredulous. No, Coinneach, Blanid replied, her voice grave, almost a funeral chant. It was not a dream. What you described was exactly what happened the night your mother died. A shiver ran through him. He brought his hands to his face, trying to contain the torrent of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. That voice calling to him in dreams, those eyes watching him in the shadows, they were not fantasies. They were memories. The luminous song of his mother. The child crying in his bed, gripped by fear as screams of agony tore through the night, it was not him. It was Angus being born into that torment. How is this possible? How could they have kept such a secret for so long, so zealously, erasing every suspicion? And yet he knew. The moment Blanid spoke, the truth blazed in his memory with a painful clarity. "God damn you all," he roared, jaw rigid. "Coinneach," Blanid began. "Why did no one ever tell me?" he growled, not raising his eyes. He could not look at her. He feared his anger would betray him. "It was your father who ordered it," Blanid confessed. "He swore you must not know." "I already know that," he replied bitterly. "Who else knew, Blanid?" "He did it for your own good, my son." He lifted his head, eyes burning like steel. "I asked who else knew." "The MacAilpeins, naturally." Coinneach sprang to his feet and slammed his fist on the table, making the wood creak. "I'm not talking about the MacAilpeins. I want to know, among my own people." "Who?" "Thomas," she admitted in a faint voice. "Your father's most loyal friend." "Who else?" "Many, Coinneach. Many. But none of our children, because your father forbade it." The Scot shook his head in disbelief, as if the earth itself were opening beneath him. "So, everyone knew?" "Not everyone. Only those of us who were adults at the time. Most had no idea. Believe me, your father never meant to hurt you, Coinneach, my treasure." He looked at her with a bitter grimace. "Oh really? Then tell me, how the hell did Angus find out?" Blathnid's silence confirmed it. She lowered her eyes, ashamed. "I told him." Coinneach felt his blood pound in his temples. "You?" He came back enraged after MacAilpein refused him his younger daughter's hand. He wanted to know why that man had despised him, even before listening. "And why?" Coinneach asked, voice tense as a rope about to snap. "Because." Blanid swallowed hard. "MacAilpein's brother was your mother's lover. Your father killed him. Unintentionally. They had been lifelong friends, but anger blinded them, and neither knew how to stop." Coinneach closed his eyes, as if he could lock the memory in darkness. "You never saw her, Coinneach," Blanid continued, "but Angus is the living image of your mother. While you inherited every trait of your father." He said nothing. Only the trembling of his hands betrayed the storm inside. "Angus never had a chance with MacAilpein's daughter. That's why I thought it right for him to know the truth. It was incredible enough that the old man gave you Isabel. God knows how much I regret having spoken." "Why did he do it?" Coinneach whispered, his voice hoarse. "MacAilpein? I don't know. I wish he had never yielded. Between you and Angus, I would have chosen Angus," she said with brutal honesty. "And not because I despise you, Coinneach, you know that. But you and Isabel never loved each other. He, on the other hand, adored his sister. And he always envied you. Envied you since childhood. He never loved you, Coinneach. He only envied the bond you had with your father." Coinneach shook his head, overwhelmed, as if all certainty had slipped away. "I cannot believe you hid this from me all this time, Blanid. It was your father's will. We swore to protect you." "No," Coinneach roared, this time his voice a whip of fury and pain. "It was not to protect me. It was to protect himself. He did not want to face the truth, that his wife had loved another. Just as he did not want a weak, imperfect son, but a reflection of himself. A son forged in his image." He clenched his fists, ice-cold hatred burning through him. "Proud bastard. Now I understand everything. No wonder Angus hates me. Who could blame him?" A new intrusion. A heavy silence hung like a slab. Blanid lowered her head, unable to respond. And why have you chosen this very moment to unburden your conscience, Blanid? Coinneach asked, his voice tense, forged from restrained iron. She lifted her chin, her eyes glistening with tears. Ah. Angus, she murmured, her lips trembling. I didn't. The door burst open, shattering the atmosphere like a sword cutting through fog. Coinneach, Beethan bellowed. You must come at once. Coinneach's nerves were stretched to the limit, every muscle on the verge of snapping. He barely believed he could endure another intrusion. What is it now, Beethan? He growled without turning, fists pressed into the table. It's Davy, the man said, breathless. Coinneach straightened with a start. Davy. Yes, Beethan confirmed, grim. He's arriving with MacShimidh. They've come to claim the Earl's daughter. Chapter 46. In Davy's honour, King of Scotland, or so he proclaimed himself, one had to admit he knew how to listen in silence. Coinneach scarcely perceived his presence atop his horse. His mind was too tightly bound to a single thought, Nòraidh's disappearance. He had sent for her as soon as the girl's father arrived, and then they had told him she was gone. It made no sense. The maiden could not have known her progenitor had come, and there was no reason for her to have gone off so late. He himself had left her only a short while earlier. She could not have gone far. Unlike the king, MacShimidh had dismounted, and now paced in circles like a caged beast, fury marking every gesture. I cannot believe that you have lost her, the count roared. Coinneach barely restrained the urge to run him through on the spot. I entrusted my daughter to you, MacShimidh went on shouting. Is this how you have protected her? Coinneach bit his tongue. There would be time to deal with that wretch, but not before finding the girl. Still, the vileness of his lie set his fury ablaze. Entrusted, he thundered. Is that what you Sassenach call repudiating your own blood? The count faltered. I was enraged. I did not know what I was saying. Infamous liar, Thomas spat. Coinneach shot him a sharp look to silence him, then fixed his gaze once more on MacShimidh. I gave you countless chances to retract, and you refused them all. You seemed more than convinced. I said I was enraged. And do you think I am not? Coinneach replied, his voice low, terrible. The fact that I still listen to you does not mean I do not long to tear out your heart with my own hands. The count looked at him warily. A man without reason is no man, Coinneach went on, ice in his voice. He is a beast. A taut silence. No, you are worse than the vilest of beasts. Not even they sacrifice their young. MacShimidh lowered his gaze and in a thread of a voice said, I did not know she was my daughter. Coinneach froze. Of all the answers possible, that was the one he least expected. The revelation struck him like an axe, just as he himself had spent too long drowning in unbearable truths. He had no time to respond. Tormod burst in from the tower, panting. I cannot find Arhane nor Angus, he cried. I have searched everywhere. They have vanished. An alarmed murmur rippled through the crowd. Coinneach's pulse went wild. Not Arhane nor Angus nor Nòraidh. The hair at the nape of his neck bristled. None of them. No one has seen them leave. Tormod wailed. Then a cry tore through the night, a child's voice. His son's voice. Arhane. Coinneach shouted, forcing his way through the crowd. Papa, the little one screamed, running toward him, his eyes brimming with terror. Coinneach ran to meet him, swept him up in his arms in desperation. My son, what has happened? Angus. Nòraidh. Arhane sobbed, unable to hold back the tears. Coinneach's heart stopped for an instant. He shook him urgently. Speak, Arhane. What happened? Angus, he wanted to kill me, father. Nòraidh, she pushed him. The words broke apart amid hiccups of terror. Coinneach felt his legs give way. Pushed him? Where? The child clung tighter to his neck. I didn't want to leave her alone, but she ordered me to run. And now? Where is she? Coinneach asked, his voice a thread of steel. Arhane shouted the answer. She fell from the cliff farther. She fell into the void. The world became a roar in his ears. Coinneach placed his son in the arms of whoever could protect him, while his own soul burned with despair. Blessed Christ, he prayed in silence, do not let it be too late. An oath before God. A promise to the clan. A surrender to love. Nòraidh hung suspended after a brutal fall, battered against rock and thorn, until her body crashed onto a ledge barely wider than her feet. The impact stole her breath, and for a moment she thought the sea below called her with its deep roar. But her bloodied hands clutched the stone like a final vow of life. The north wind whispered through the cracks, howling like an angry spirit. Groping with her feet, she searched for a crevice in the rock. She found it and dug her fingers in with desperation. Time became infinite. The ocean's foam rose in white gusts as if claiming her. Then at last she heard distant voices tearing through the roar like a lightning strike of hope. She did not wait for them to speak her name, she shouted, her cry merging with the sea's roar. Are you hurt, maiden? Coinneach's voice descended like a lifeline from the top of the cliff. Nòraidh replied with irony, though her throat burned. If I were, I'd rather not find out now. Ask me when you have me above. The brief troubled laugh she heard from above gave her a fleeting breath of relief. Very well, he answered. Hold on tight. I'm coming for you. For all the saints, of course I'm holding on, she yelled. I don't need you to remind me. Another laugh choked by fear reached her ears. Yet Nòraidh's hands were beginning to fail, numb from the icy wind, torn by the cruel rock. But she would not die swallowed by the darkness of the sea. Hurry, she pleaded, her voice breaking. Keep talking to me, girl, Coinneach commanded, firm, though urgency trembled beneath every word. Your voice will be my guide. And what in the world do you want me to say? She gasped. Anything but speak. Suddenly, another voice cut through the gale. Let me speak to her. Nòraidh's heart constricted. No, it could not be. Go to hell, Coinneach roared. You've done enough harm. Step aside and leave her alone. Nòraidh's blood froze. Her father? Was he there? The shock made her slip another inch, a scream escaped her throat. Father, she whimpered. Is that you? Yes, Nòraidh. It is I, the Count's voice came rough, almost broken. Coinneach swore, his voice muffled by the wind's roar. You've come. Nòraidh shouted, just as her fingers slipped for a moment. Desperately she grabbed a bush hanging from the rock, while the sea below roared like a lurking monster. The stem cracked, torn from its roots, and panting she managed to clutch another ledge by sheer fortune. Holy Mother of God, she cried. Yes, my daughter, the Count replied. There is so much I must tell you. It would be the first time, Nòraidh thought, with a sharp edge of bitterness. To hell with your confessions. Coinneach bellowed, relentless. This is no time for them. Move aside. Gentlemen, Nòraidh interrupted, her voice trembling beneath the wind's whistle. While you quarrel, my hands bleed, my feet slip, and the sea claims me. I will not end like Angus. An unbearable silence followed, broken only by the waves' roar and the gulls' cries. Then Coinneach's voice descended, firm, powerful like an oath. Do not fear, my love. I am coming to you. Nòraidh felt the rock creak beneath his weight as he descended. Tiny stones tumbled into the sea. She closed her eyes, praying, while the wind whipped her like icy lashes. Coinneach and Angus, she whispered. Are you certain he fell? He asked, his voice grave, almost swallowed by the ocean. The memory of Angus's scream pierced her like a knife, an endless howl devoured by the black waves. Yes, she said, her soul shrinking. He is dead. Chapter 47. The illegitimate child. The scrape of boots against the rock announced Coinneach's arrival. We fell together, Nòraidh murmured, opening her eyes in the dim light, searching for his silhouette. But I got caught here and he sank down there. Thank God, she added silently. Thank God, Coinneach repeated aloud. Now his voice sounded closer, rough and wounded. Arhane told me. Christ's blood. I thought I had lost you, girl. Nòraidh slipped for a moment, One foot lost its grip, and the pebbles tumbled into the abyss, vanishing in the roar of the sea. She swallowed hard, desperately seeking another hold. "I told you," she panted, "I'm stubborn and clever." A low, toothy laugh answered her in the darkness. "It's true, girl." "That it is." Then she saw him. The moon reflected in his golden eyes, and her heart leapt with relief and joy. For a moment, she thought she would cry. Suddenly, Coinneach was at her side. Nòraid wanted to throw herself into his arms, but fear of letting go paralyzed her. He had to lift her from the rock. "I can't save you if you don't give me your hand," he warned. "And I won't let go until you have me safe," she replied, a flash of fierceness in her tone. He growled with the shadow of a smile. "Always quick with your tongue." "Calm down, warrior," she jabbed at him, with a desperate humor. "My father has finally come to rescue me from your clutches. You won't have to endure my tongue much longer." A brief roar escaped his chest before he lifted her from the rock and held her close. Then Nòraid broke. Uncontrollable tears ran down her face as she clung to his neck, babbling incoherent words. Coinneach cradled her tenderly, stroking her hair, holding her as if she were the most fragile and sacred treasure in the world. "Hold on to me, Nòraid," he whispered in her ear. "And don't let go." She obeyed, hiding her face in his neck, trembling as she kissed his warm skin. She wrapped her legs around his waist and clung with all the strength she had left. "Ah," Coinneach murmured, pressing her to his chest. Nòraid almost felt suffocated, but she didn't care. She only wished he would never let her go. "Artair told me everything," he continued, containing his pride. "You are brave, girl. You will grow to be a worthy Scot." "I'm sorry for Angus," she whispered. "Do not carry that guilt," Coinneach replied, kissing her forehead. "Artair hurt in the heart, but he will survive," she promised firmly. "And my father." Coinneach was silent for a moment, as if every word tasted of iron. "Yes, Nòraid. He has come for you, just as you always said he would." She closed her eyes, burying her face in the warrior's soaked tartan, inhaling his scent of iron, sea and smoke. What she felt was indescribable, perhaps joy, perhaps anguish, or both. But she knew with absolute certainty to whom her heart belonged. And it was not her father. "For all the saints, Coinneach MacCoinnich," a voice thundered from above, "do not keep us in suspense. Have you reached her or not? Are you ready to face it?" Coinneach whispered in her ear. Nòraid let out a broken laugh, pressing closer to him. "Do I even have a choice?" she said with a hint of melancholic irony. "If I said no, could we stay here forever?" He let out a deep chuckle. "I'm afraid Thomas would not agree." Coinneach Thomas bellowed from above, "Move! You weigh like a mountain, and these old hands cannot hold you forever." "Do you hear that?" Coinneach called out. "We're fine, Thomas. Lift us up." Nòraid could not suppress a bitter thought. Part of her suddenly wished she had smashed against the rocks, for until a few hours ago she had never lived so intensely, nor felt so loved. Now all that remained was an unbearable emptiness. Her father had finally come for her. Coinneach's heart was torn. In one day he had discovered a brother and lost him. He had been a step away from losing his son, and the woman he loved. He swore he would set order in that whirlwind later. For now Nòraid was safe in his arms, though he would soon have to give her up. He held her a moment longer before handing her to the outstretched arms of Cailín and MacAilpein. Then with Thomas's help he himself reached the top. Under the moon Nòraid looked like a lost child. Coinneach felt a sharp pang in his chest. He wanted to tear her from the arms of the man who dared call himself her father. But he restrained himself. And when he saw Nòraid rise before MacShimidh, neither bowing nor begging, pride coursed through him. "I have come to take you home, my daughter," the Count said. The word daughter fell like red-hot iron on Nòraid's heart. She had waited all her life to hear it. And now at last she heard it, and only wanted to slap him. She stood with the dignity of a queen, eyes fixed on his. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady. The Count lowered his gaze, pondered, and finally held her with an air of chilling coldness. Do you want the truth? I do. I never believed you were my daughter. I thought you were the illegitimate child of Nòraidh, and my wife. Between honor and passion, a woman must choose her destiny. Nòraidh frowned. Perhaps she should have felt devastated by that revelation, and yet she did not. I understand, she murmured, searching in those words for a relief that never came. Inside her she found only renewed fury. And now? Your mother left this world long ago, replied the Count, his voice heavy with belated weight. I cannot undo the harm I caused her. Nòraidh remained silent, her lips sealed by a tide of emotions struggling to break free. I never believed her, Nòraidh, he went on, lowering his gaze to the damp earth. But at last I confronted Nòraidh when he came to claim the boy. His Majesty swore to me, with his life as witness, that your mother was an honorable woman, that she had never lain with him. And I did not believe him then. He lifted his head, his eyes laden with a resentment that was finally collapsing. I poured my anger onto you. That is why, my daughter, today I offer you my apologies. Apologies? For a childhood stripped of love? For a whole life marked by humiliation? For condemning her mother to solitude, accusing her of a sin she had never committed? Nòraidh stayed silent, her heart torn. I never understood what he could see in her, when the King of England coveted her, he continued bitterly. Driving her away, that was my fault, Nòraidh. But I will make amends, I swear it. I will find you a powerful husband, and you shall be a noble lady, as you always should have been. Nòraigh's eyes filled with tears. Those were the words she had longed for since childhood. Words for which she would have given everything then. But now they sounded hollow, belated, cruelly disorienting. Confusion tightened around her. What was she supposed to do? What could she do? Coinneach and his people had welcomed her generously, as if she were part of the clan, but only because her father had rejected her. And now behold, that very father had come to claim her. The wife of MacCoinnich is already a noble lady, a voice suddenly roared. Nòraidh turned and saw Beithan forcing his way through the gathered crowd, his face grim, his eyes burning with fury and defiance. His words rang like thunder in the night silence. Nòraigh's heart faltered. He had called her the wife of MacCoinnich. What startled her more, that he defended her, or that he proclaimed such a title before all? She understood then what had wounded Beithan. Saints in heaven! How had she not noticed the veiled insult in her father's words? She already was a noble lady. Wife, replied the Count, his voice steeped in contempt. My daughter is not bound to this man. She will have a better fate than a savage of the Highlands. And I tell you she is the wife of MacCoinnich, thundered Thomas, stepping forward. Yes. Several voices echoed from the crowd. She is the wife of MacCoinnich. She is. Nòraidh could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Is that true? Asked a voice emerging from the shadows. She searched for the owner of those words. It was a man on horseback who had until then observed in silence, distant and severe. Now his eyes seemed to rest upon her, as if awaiting confirmation. No, not on her. Suddenly Nòraidh understood. His gaze was not seeking her but the man standing just behind her. She turned, and there was Coinneach upright, his face serious, his eyes fixed only on her as if the entire world had vanished. My daughter is not the wife of that barbarian, the Count bellowed, his voice thick with rage. That man has stolen her from me. And I demand that she be returned. Stolen. Returned. Her father's words struck her like blows. The Count turned to the rider. I demand that you order him to give her back to me. You demand, replied the man in the gloom, a hint of threat in his voice. I did not come all this way to leave empty-handed, MacShimidh roared. Give her back to me or what? The knight interrupted. Or I. Coinneach MacCoinnich, the rider said, then ignoring the Count, what say you? Is this woman your wife, or not? Nòraidh held her breath, her eyes closed, her soul poised on the edge of the abyss. She awaited the sentence. Then she heard Coinneach's voice, firm as a blade. "Why do you not ask, my lady?" Nòraid opened her eyes, bewildered. He added nothing more. He merely looked at her, and smiled with a tenderness that disarmed her, inclining his head slightly, inviting her to decide. And in that instant, in the purity of that gesture, Nòraid understood what true love was. A sudden, luminous revelation, as simple as it was eternal. The choice rose before her with the clarity of a drawn sword. On one side, a father who had never acknowledged her, who had loved her so little he had not even given her a name. On the other, a man who, even at the risk of angering her, had offered it to her with tenderness and asked nothing in return. Between blood that had denied her, and land that had welcomed her, between the disdain of a progenitor and the loyalty of a chief, who had received her into his clan despite her venomous tongue, and the troubles she had brought with her. She smiled at the thought. Coinneach MacCoinnich had not sought her, fate had placed her in his hands. And even so he had not cast her aside. She turned then to her father, and her eyes met his. "Say it, Nòraid," the Count thundered, his voice of iron. And suddenly she understood. It had not been her father who had torn her from death, but Coinneach's arms which had held her fast and carried her to safety. He was the one who loved her enough that, in that moment, he offered her the most precious thing a man can give, the freedom to choose.
"What do you say, maiden?" asked the knight on horseback whose presence imposed silence.
Nòraid did not know who he was, but in her bones she recognized the gravity of his rank. Even Coinneach, without servility, showed him deference. Davy of Scotland, she thought, for only a king of those lands could present himself in MacCoinnich territory with such scant escort and such sovereign assurance. She sought Coinneach's gaze, yearning for a silent certainty. He, as if reading her prayer, inclined his head slightly, inviting her to speak. Nòraid lifted her chin, her voice lit by a new strength. "I am." The Count frowned.
"What do you say you are?"
"The wife of MacCoinnich," she murmured, her voice a thin thread breaking in the air. "No," her father roared. "That confession has been forced from her. You have seen it." Nòraid straightened, her face turned toward the royal knight. "No one has forced me," she replied firmly. "Louder, Nòraid," Coinneach whispered behind her, and in that instant her heart filled with a joy she had never known. She smiled, and with a clear voice that resounded over the crowd declared, "I am the wife of MacCoinnich." A clamor swept through the Highlanders like thunder in the mountains. The air filled with shouts of jubilation, and Nòraid's heart swelled until it ached in her chest. The knight turned his gaze to Coinneach. "Is what she proclaims true?" Coinneach stepped forward, wrapping her in an embrace that was both shield and caress. "It is." "Then MacShimidh," the man on horseback pronounced solemnly, "there can be no doubt that your daughter is the wife of MacCoinnich." Another wave of cheers shook the clan. Nòraid scarcely noticed her father's fury, nor his curses, nor the shouts of the warriors driving him from their lands. She was aware only of the man at her back, of the warmth of his arms. She saw, as in a dream, the Count mounting in rage and riding away beneath the hail of insults and threats.
"This is not over," he managed to shout.
"I will demand satisfaction." Nòraid let out a brief laugh. "He will," she whispered to Coinneach. "He cannot bear to see his plans undone." "You warned me," he replied calmly. "But he will not return. Look at them. Even with your sharp tongue you have earned a place in everyone's heart. If your father dared come back, they would flay him alive." She laughed softly. The image was as brutal as it was true. And though part of her felt a pang of sadness at seeing her father leave, another part felt strangely free, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I love you, lass," Coinneach murmured against her ear, holding her close with fervor. Then, as if remembering something, he reached into the folds of his plaid. "Ah. I have something for you." From the wall he drew out a wilted remnant, the yellow crocus she had thrown to the ground in a sudden fit. He had kept it. "From the moment I held you in that bed of flowers," he confessed, "I knew you were mine. But I wanted to hear it from your lips." Nòraid could not hold back her tears. "I am," she sobbed. "And you are mine." "Say it again," he encouraged her gently. I am the wife of MacCoinnich, she breathed, a sigh of pure bliss. And you shall always be, Coinneach affirmed solemnly. You will never regret it. Before God, I take you as my wife and promise you my love and my loyalty. Nòraidh, half in disbelief and half radiant, whispered, Love? Truly. He turned her to face him. His hands held her with firmness and tenderness at once.
Never doubt it.
I love you with ardor, with truth and with joy. Before sealing his lips to hers with a kiss, he brushed his nose against hers as one who seals an eternal pact. And I love you, Nòraidh confessed, her voice trembling with emotion. I love you with ardor, with sincerity and with joy. And she truly felt it, without fear or reservation. Without warning, Coinneach lifted her aloft and with playful strength, swung her over his shoulder as if she were a precious prize. Nòraidh let out a stifled cry of surprise, feigning indignation. What are you doing, barbarian? She exclaimed, tapping his back lightly. Taking you home, lass, before you change your mind. A clear crystalline laugh escaped her lips, lighting the air. After all, I am a Highlands savage, he reminded her mischievously. You wouldn't want me to disappoint your father, would you? Nòraigh's joyful clamour rang out like bells over the mountains. Coinneach lowered his voice slightly, grave and promising. First I will take you to my son, so he can see with his own eyes that you are alive. Then I will take you to my bed. And then you will sing me a song, sweet and yours as only you can. And so Coinneach kept his word. And so Nòraidh, amid laughter and trembling happiness, kept hers as well. Epilogue. The Ballad of the Yellow Crocus. In the mist of Scotland was born the song, where iron clashes and the drum resounds strong. She, a denied daughter with no name, no home, found in the clan's arms her place to roam. A yellow crocus kept the vow held tight, a fragile symbol, eternal in love's light. Where memory blooms, desire burns bright, stronger than blood, deeper than yesterday's night. He, lord of lands of pride and of steel, fell captive to a kiss genuine and real. She was repudiated yet rose at last, wife of MacCoinnich, her song unsurpassed. And before kings and mountains her voice rang clear, I am the bride that destiny chose here. The clan answered with an ancestral cry, the union of their souls no force could deny. A yellow crocus shone within her hand, like a tiny flame that time could not strand. May the earth keep it safe, may the wind lift it high, a redeeming love that not even time can untie. The end. Author's note. This story was born like a gentle mist rising from heather-covered hills, and the murmur of a stream hidden among ancient stones. It was not merely the whisper of an impossible love, nor just the echo of a feud between clans, it was the voice of the land itself, of a Scotland that still speaks to us through the wind, the ruins and the names that endure beyond time. The clans that inhabit these pages are more than warring families, they are guardians of a memory that clings to rock, lake and mountain. Their vows, spoken beneath the open sky, weighed as heavily as the steel of swords. And yet, even amid wars, betrayals and royal decrees, what seemed impossible flourished, a love that defied lineage and ancient wounds. I wanted this novel to also be a hymn to identity and belonging. Nòraidh and Coinneach are children of a world torn apart by the ambitions of crowns, yet in their meeting they find the possibility of healing what seemed doomed. Like the crocus that blooms through the snow, fragile and radiant, their love reminds us that what is delicate can also be eternal. The power of stories lies precisely in this, they remind us of what must not be forgotten. Beyond the accuracy of events, they return to us the heartbeat of the human, that which pulses beneath names and dates. Because in every tale there is a promise, a mirror in which to recognize ourselves, a fire that burns even as centuries pass. To those who feel they carry a name hard to pronounce, to those rejected by blood but chosen by destiny, to those who believe that even amid darkness beauty can bloom, I dedicate these pages. Thank you for walking with me through the Highlands. Thank you for listening, amid the mist, to the ancient voice of stories. With respect and gratitude. Arhane Hygeia.